It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sun streamed through the tall windows of the hotel lobby, casting a soft glow on the polished floors. The usual buzz of guests and staff filled the air, the murmur of quiet conversations and the occasional ringing of telephones. But as Ethan Williams stood at the reception desk, a sense of unease began to settle in. Follow the whole story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your opinion below in the comments section. It motivates us to share more impactful stories. Ethan, in his early 30s, was a businessman who had spent years building his empire from the ground up. With dark hair neatly combed and a well-tailored suit that gave him an air of confidence, he certainly didn't look like someone who would have to face such an accusation. His sharp blue eyes scanned the lobby, and the smile he had on his face as he walked in was long gone. The hotel was his now, a beautiful, modern establishment located in the heart of the city. He had purchased it a few months ago as part of a new expansion into the luxury hospitality business. Today, however, it seemed as though everything was about to unravel. A young man named Jason, one of the front desk attendants, walked up to him, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Williams, there's an issue with one of the guests," he said in a low voice, his tone nervous. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issue?" "We've had a complaint," Jason continued. "Apparently, one of our customers, a woman, claimed that you took something from the gift shop. A necklace. She said she saw you leaving the store with it." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "I took a necklace?" he asked, incredulous. "I've been in the lobby for the last hour." Jason hesitated. "Yes, sir. The woman is insisting that you stole it. It's causing a bit of a scene." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "This is absurd. Are you telling me that someone is accusing me of stealing from my own hotel?" Jason nervously nodded. "I'm afraid so, Mr. Williams. I think it would be best if you spoke to Mrs. Grant, the head of security. She's already handling it." As Ethan followed Jason down the hallway to the security office, the weight of the accusation grew heavier. He couldn't understand how anyone could believe such a thing. He was the owner of the hotel. Why would he steal something so trivial? And why, of all people, was it him that was being targeted? When they reached the security office, Mrs. Grant, a tall woman in her mid-40s with an imposing presence, stood waiting by the door. Her expression was stern, and as she saw Ethan approach, she didn't smile or offer any greeting. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice cool, "I assume you've heard the complaint?" "I've heard it, Mrs. Grant, and I can assure you, it's completely unfounded," Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone calm. His patience was starting to wear thin, but he knew he needed to remain professional. Mrs. Grant didn't immediately respond. Instead, she nodded for Ethan to follow her into the room. The surveillance footage from the gift shop was already playing on the screen. Ethan watched as the footage showed him walking into the store just minutes earlier, but then his stomach churned when he saw the woman in question, an older guest, approach the counter, her eyes fixed on him. The camera didn't capture any clear theft, but the way she pointed at him when the security guard came over made it clear that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. "Do you see what I see, Mr. Williams?" Mrs. Grant asked, her tone almost accusatory. "I see a woman who is clearly mistaken," Ethan replied, his voice starting to edge with frustration. "I've been in the lobby the entire time. I didn't even pick up anything from the store." Mrs. Grant seemed unmoved. "Perhaps we should check your bag, just to be sure." Ethan's patience snapped. "Check my bag? Are you serious? I'm the owner of this hotel. You cannot treat me like this." Jason, who had been standing in the corner, looked at Mrs. Grant nervously. "Maybe we should just take another look at the footage, Mrs. Grant," he suggested quietly. Mrs. Grant glanced at him, then reluctantly ordered Jason to rewind the video. The footage replayed, this time in more detail, and it was clear that Ethan had walked into the store, browsed for a few moments, and then left with nothing. The woman in the video was the one who had approached the counter and made the accusation. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "You see," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I never took anything. This is just a mistake." Mrs. Grant's face hardened. She wasn't convinced. "The complaint still stands," she said, "and protocol is protocol. We'll need to confirm this with the woman who made the accusation. Until then, I'm afraid you'll have to stay here while we investigate." Ethan clenched his fists at his sides. This was getting ridiculous. He had worked tirelessly to get to where he was, and now he was being treated like a common criminal. Absolutely not, Ethan said, his voice firm. You'll clear my name now, or I'll make sure this hotel will no longer be yours to manage. I'm the one who owns this place, Mrs. Grant. Her eyes widened in surprise at his words. Mr. Williams, Check your facts, he interrupted. And don't ever make the mistake of questioning my integrity again. As he stormed out of the security office, he could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him. He had always known that being an entrepreneur, and especially a black entrepreneur, would bring challenges. But he didn't expect to face such blatant disrespect so early on in his journey. The lobby felt colder as he walked past the staff, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let this stand. He'd clear his name and make sure that no one, especially in his own hotel, ever questioned his authority again. Ethan stood outside the security office, his mind racing. The cool air of the hotel's grand lobby did little to calm him. In fact, it only seemed to amplify his growing frustration. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The accusations, the disrespect, the way he had been treated, it all felt like a cruel joke. He turned back to look at Mrs. Grant and Jason, who were still inside the office, no doubt discussing the next steps in their so-called investigation. He knew that as the owner of this hotel, he was above suspicion, yet here he was, being dragged into some petty drama over a false claim. He had to put an end to it, but first, he needed more information. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed a number that he knew would get him the answers he needed. Hello? A voice answered on the other end. Harold, it's Ethan. I need you to come down here. We've got a situation. Harold Miller was one of Ethan's most trusted advisors, a no-nonsense former investigator with an impeccable reputation. Ethan had called on him before for matters involving delicate situations, and this one certainly qualified. What's going on? Harold asked, his voice steady despite the early hour. I've been accused of theft. A guest at my hotel, Mrs. Bennett, claims she saw me steal a necklace from the gift shop, Ethan explained. It's completely ridiculous, but Mrs. Grant and the staff seem to be taking her side. I need you to come down here, review the footage, and help me figure out what's really going on. There was a brief pause on the other end, then Harold responded. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Stay calm, Ethan. We'll get to the bottom of this. Ethan hung up and let out a long sigh. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this than just a simple misunderstanding. After all, how many times had someone tried to discredit him because of his success, his race, or his position in the world? He wasn't naive enough to think this was just an accident. He made his way to the hotel's back office, a small but secure space where he could think and gather his thoughts. As he sat behind his desk, he began to piece together the events of the day. The necklace, he couldn't even recall seeing it in the gift shop. So why had Mrs. Bennett made such a claim? What had she seen that made her think he was the thief? And more importantly, why was it his reputation that was on the line, not hers? As he sat there contemplating, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Jason, his face pale and nervous. Mr. Williams, I'm sorry to bother you again, Jason said, his voice shaking. But the guest who made the accusation, she's demanding to speak to you. She says she won't leave until you explain yourself. Ethan's jaw tightened. This was getting out of hand. Tell her I'll be right there, he replied, rising from his chair. Jason nodded and hurried off. Ethan took one last look at his phone, checking the time. Harold would be there soon, and when he arrived, they'd dig deeper into the surveillance footage. But for now, he needed to face Mrs. Bennett and figure out why she was making these claims. He walked back into the lobby, where Mrs. Bennett was sitting in a plush armchair near the front desk. The older woman looked up as he approached, her eyes cold and accusatory. Well, Mr. Williams, it's about time, she said, her voice sharp. I trust you're here to explain why you think it's acceptable to steal from your own hotel? Ethan stood tall, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. I didn't steal anything, Mrs. Bennett. I'm the owner of this hotel. I've been here for over an hour, and I've never taken a single thing from the gift shop. Mrs. Bennett's lips curled into a smug smile. That's not what I saw, young man. I saw you in there, leaving with the necklace. It's a beautiful piece, worth a lot of money. I'm sure you know that. Ethan clenched his fists, but forced himself to remain calm. You're mistaken, Mrs. Bennet. I didn't take anything. I was simply in the shop, but I didn't purchase or take anything. Her eyes narrowed. Well, perhaps you didn't take it intentionally, but I saw you, and I'm not going to let it go. I'll make sure your reputation is ruined if I have to. The last word stung. Ethan was used to dealing with difficult people, but something about this woman's tone made him feel as though she was deliberately trying to destroy him. And it wasn't just about the necklace. This felt personal. Before Ethan could respond, Harold entered the lobby, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Harold's presence was commanding, and he immediately moved toward Ethan with a confident stride. Ethan, let's get to the bottom of this, Harold said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. Ethan nodded. Mrs. Bennet, this is Harold Miller, a trusted advisor of mine. He's going to help us review the footage and clear up this misunderstanding. Mrs. Bennet's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I don't need anyone else's help to prove the truth. Harold didn't flinch. We'll see about that. As they all made their way to the security office, Ethan could sense that things were about to get much more complicated. This wasn't just a case of a simple mistake. Someone had orchestrated this, and it was up to him to uncover the truth before his name was tarnished beyond repair. The security office was small, its walls lined with monitors that displayed various areas of the hotel. Ethan sat in front of one screen, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest of his chair. Harold sat next to him, scanning the footage from the security cameras while Mrs. Bennet stood by, arms crossed and a look of stubborn defiance on her face. Harold's face remained calm and focused as he rewound the footage, playing back the events that had unfolded in the gift shop earlier that day. The camera captured the moment when Ethan had entered the store, a casual walk as he perused the shelves. Nothing unusual, just a regular guest at his own establishment, taking a quick look at the merchandise. They watched as Ethan briefly interacted with the sales associate, but nothing about his actions appeared suspicious. The footage then moved to the point where he exited the shop and walked down the hallway. Mrs. Bennet had claimed to have seen him leave with the necklace, but the video told a different story. I don't see anything, Ethan said, frustration building. Harold, are you sure this footage is from the right camera? Harold nodded, his eyes glued to the screen. This is the right one. There's no sign of the necklace. You didn't take it. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He had been hoping for this. He had known all along that the accusation was baseless, but seeing the evidence on screen was a relief. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play here. This wasn't just about a mistake. Mrs. Bennet was so certain. Mrs. Bennet's voice broke the silence. You're wasting your time, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. I know what I saw. I'm not going to let this go just because you've got some fancy security footage. Harold glanced at her, his sharp eyes piercing. You're welcome to feel however you want, ma'am, but the footage doesn't lie. If you have any evidence to the contrary, feel free to present it. Mrs. Bennet's lips pressed together into a tight line, her face reddening with frustration. I don't need to present anything. You're all just protecting each other. But I'll make sure people hear about this. Mark my words. Ethan stood up, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He couldn't let this drag on any longer. The longer Mrs. Bennet stayed in the hotel, the more damage she could do to his reputation. It was time to confront her head-on. You can try to ruin my reputation all you want, Mrs. Bennet, but I'm not going to let that happen, Ethan said firmly. I'm the owner of this hotel. My staff is loyal, and the security footage is clear. I didn't take anything. Now, I'm giving you one chance to walk away from this before I take legal action. Mrs. Bennet's eyes widened, her arrogance faltering for a moment. But then, just as quickly, she regained her composure. I'll make sure this isn't the last you hear of me, she spat, turning on her heel and marching toward the exit. Harold leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. I don't like the way she's acting, Ethan. There's more to this than just a simple misunderstanding. Ethan nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. Someone is feeding her lies, trying to cause trouble for me. But who? Harold's eyes narrowed as he analyzed the situation. It's not just her. Someone else must be behind this. The way she's so sure of herself, it's almost as if she's been coached. And we need to find out who's pulling the strings. Ethan stood up, his decision made. I'm going to find out who's behind this, Harold. I won't let someone ruin my name without consequences. But for now, we need to deal with Mrs. Bennet. She's gone, but this isn't over. Harold nodded. I'll keep digging. Let's see what else we can uncover. But be careful, Ethan. Whoever is behind this isn't just trying to ruin your reputation. They might be trying to take you down for good. Ethan's mind raced as he thought about the many people who might have a reason to want him out of the picture. Business rivals? Disgruntled employees? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that someone had been planning this for a while. This wasn't a random event. It was part of a bigger scheme. And whoever was behind it would stop at nothing to see it through. But he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more he thought about Mrs. Bennet's accusation, the more he realized that there was a deeper, darker force at play. Someone wasn't just targeting him. They were setting a trap. The morning air was crisp as Ethan walked into the hotel lobby, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. His mind raced with questions. Who would want to hurt him? And why? The hotel had been his life for years, built from the ground up, and now, it seemed like someone was determined to tear it all down. As he stepped into the lobby, he spotted a familiar face, Detective Maya Rivers. She was seated in one of the chairs near the front desk, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. Maya had worked with Ethan in the past on a few minor security issues, but today she had a different energy about her, a quiet intensity that caught his attention. Maya, Ethan greeted her, his voice steady. What brings you here today? Maya stood, offering a brief nod. Ethan, we need to talk. I've been doing some digging on your situation. I think you're being targeted by someone close to you. Ethan's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. Close to me? What are you talking about? Maya's eyes flickered to the security camera near the entrance, a subtle gesture that indicated she wanted to keep things quiet. It's not just Mrs. Bennet. I've been looking at her background, and there's something off about her involvement here. But the bigger issue is the way things are playing out. This feels like an inside job. Ethan's mind reeled. An inside job? But who would want to bring him down? He had good relationships with most of his staff, and his competitors were too far removed to do something so personal. He was sure of it. Are you suggesting someone here at the hotel is involved? Ethan asked, his voice lowering. He glanced around, his gaze catching the eyes of a few employees who passed by, their faces neutral but unreadable. Maya nodded, her expression serious. I've been tracking some patterns. Small inconsistencies, things that wouldn't stand out unless you knew what to look for. It's someone who has access to your inner circle. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. The idea that someone he trusted could be plotting against him was a bitter pill to swallow. But Maya wasn't the type to make wild accusations. If she said there was something suspicious, there probably was. I've already spoken with a few of your employees. Some of them are getting nervous, especially after that whole incident with the necklace, Maya continued. But there's one person I need you to keep an eye on, Jordan Taylor. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Jordan? He's been with the hotel for years. I trust him. He handles a lot of the bookings, keeps everything running smoothly. Maya didn't flinch. That's the problem. He's been getting too close to some of your competitors lately. I've seen him meeting with them on the side, away from the public eye. Not only that, but he was one of the first people to suggest that Mrs. Bennet might be right about you taking the necklace. Ethan's heart sank. Jordan. He'd always thought of him as a reliable ally. But if what Maya was saying was true, it meant that someone he had trusted for years might have been involved in the plot against him. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it's starting to look like Jordan's position here might be a cover for something more, Maya said, her voice low but filled with determination. I'll keep investigating, but in the meantime, you need to watch your back. Ethan nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. I'll talk to him, but I need to be careful. If he's involved in this, it could be bigger than just him. There could be others. Maya stood up, her expression hardening. Be vigilant. I'll stay on this, but if Jordan is playing you, you'll need to act fast. You don't want to give him the chance to destroy everything you've worked for. As Maya walked out of the lobby, Ethan's thoughts raced. Jordan. He couldn't believe it, but he had to know the truth. He had to confront him and figure out where his loyalties really lay. Ethan stepped into the hotel office, the familiar hum of activity surrounding him. His mind was far from the usual business tasks. Every interaction, every glance from his employees felt charged with suspicion now. Who could he trust? Who could he not? He walked into the back office and found Jordan sitting at his desk, reviewing the hotel's latest booking reports. His head snapped up when Ethan entered, a flash of surprise quickly masked by his usual polite smile. Ethan, good morning. How can I help you today? Ethan met his gaze, his voice calm but filled with underlying tension. We need to talk, Jordan. About the necklace, about everything. Jordan's expression faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. Of course, Ethan. What's going on? Ethan took a seat across from him, his mind calculating every word, every movement. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. He had to know whether Jordan was guilty, or if this was all part of a much larger game. Ethan sat across from Jordan, studying his every movement. His hands, which usually fidgeted with a pen or his phone, were perfectly still now. That subtle change in behavior sent a ripple of unease through Ethan. He had to remain composed, no matter what. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious. Something wasn't right. Jordan, Ethan began, keeping his voice even but firm. I need you to be honest with me. There's been some talk about Mrs. Bennett, the necklace, and your connections outside the hotel. Jordan's eyes widened slightly, and for a brief moment, his cool exterior slipped. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that ever-present smile that had made Ethan trust him over the years. Ethan, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just doing my job, Jordan said, leaning back in his chair. His tone was casual, almost too casual. The way his eyes flicked to the door, to the window, betrayed the unease he was trying to hide. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze hardening. I know you've been meeting with some of my competitors, Jordan. And I know you were one of the first to suggest I had taken the necklace. So, tell me, what's really going on? For a moment, Jordan's face went pale. The walls Ethan had built up over their years of working together started to crack. He was about to speak when the office door swung open, and an unfamiliar voice interrupted. Is everything all right in here? Maya stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp as she scanned the room. She hadn't been scheduled for a meeting, and her presence in the office at this moment felt calculated, intentional. Ethan didn't miss a beat. Maya, I'm glad you're here. I was just talking to Jordan about some of the concerns we've been having with the recent accusations and his involvement with outside sources. Jordan's expression hardened at the sight of Maya, his posture stiffening. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising in pitch. I've worked here for years. I've been loyal. And now you're accusing me of... Maya stepped into the room, cutting him off. No one's accusing you yet, Jordan. But there's enough evidence to make it clear that you've been hiding something. We know about the meetings, about your communications with competitors. You can try to deny it, but it's all there. Ethan watched as Jordan's face shifted from defiance to panic in an instant. The air in the room grew tense, and Ethan could practically see the gears turning in Jordan's mind, calculating his next move. Would he try to lie his way out of it? Or would he finally come clean? Jordan swallowed hard and opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, Ethan raised a hand. We don't need more lies, Jordan. We need the truth. For a moment, Jordan didn't speak. His gaze dropped to the desk, and his shoulders slumped. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the silence stretched on, thick with the weight of the moment. Finally, Jordan exhaled, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. You're right, he said, his words slow and measured. I've been working with some of the competition, but it wasn't like you think. He hesitated, his eyes flicking up to meet Ethan's. I didn't want to do it. I never meant for it to go this far. But there's someone higher up, pulling the strings. Someone who knows your weaknesses. Ethan's stomach churned. Who, Jordan? Who's behind all of this? Jordan's eyes darted nervously around the room. He shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. I can't say. They threaten my family. I had no choice. I was forced to work with them. They said they'd ruin everything. Your hotel, your reputation. They know about the financial issues you've been facing. Ethan's mind raced. He'd known that the hotel was in a tight spot financially, but this was a new level of danger. Someone was using that information against him. Someone was playing a long game, and they had allies inside the hotel, people like Jordan, who were compromised and willing to betray him to protect themselves. You're telling me, Ethan said, his voice low and cold, that someone has been manipulating you this whole time, and you're just now telling me this? Jordan nodded slowly, his expression one of regret. I didn't want it to come to this, but you're right. I've been meeting with them, other hotel owners, people in the business. They promised me power, money, everything I've ever wanted in exchange for what I'm doing now. Maya stepped forward, her voice sharp. This isn't just about money, Jordan. Whoever is behind this knows exactly how to exploit your weaknesses. They know about the financial troubles, the decisions you've made, and they've been pulling your strings for months. Jordan's face twisted with guilt. I didn't want to hurt you, Ethan. I swear. But when they started making threats, I couldn't see another way out. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, anger, frustration, and a chilling realization that the situation was far worse than he had imagined. Jordan wasn't the mastermind, but he was a pawn in someone else's game. And that someone had been playing him for months, using his insecurities and vulnerabilities to orchestrate the downfall of everything Ethan had worked for. We need to find out who's behind this, Maya said, her tone decisive. Jordan, you need to help us. You've been the one close to them, and you know how they operate. The longer we wait, the harder it's going to be to fix this. Jordan looked between Ethan and Maya, his face a mixture of fear and remorse. I'll help, but I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. I've been so deep in this that I don't know who I can trust. Ethan stood up, the weight of the situation pressing on him. You're right. We'll need to be careful. But if you want to make this right, we need to act fast. We need to find out who's pulling the strings, and we need to stop them before they destroy everything. The weight of the situation seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Ethan's mind buzzed with thoughts, plans, strategies, ways to fix what had been broken. But the pieces were scattered, and the people he trusted had betrayed him. And the worst part? The mastermind behind all of this was still a mystery. Jordan sat slumped in the chair, his eyes avoiding Ethan's gaze. The truth had come out, but there was still so much left unsaid. Ethan turned to Maya, who had been silent since Jordan's confession, her arms crossed tightly as if guarding herself against the overwhelming mess that surrounded them. We need to get to the bottom of this, Maya finally spoke, her voice hard. Whoever is behind this, whoever has been pulling the strings, they're not going to stop here. We need more information, and we need it fast. Ethan nodded, pacing the room as the gears in his mind clicked into place. Jordan, what do you know about the people you've been working with? I need names, locations, anything that can help us track them down. Jordan hesitated, his fingers nervously tapping on the armrest of his chair. I don't have a lot of direct contact with them. They usually communicate through encrypted messages or meetings with intermediaries. But there's one person, one name that I've heard over and over again. Ethan paused, his attention fully focused on Jordan now. Who? Clara Voss, Jordan said, his voice barely a whisper. She's the one who first approached me. She runs a competitor's chain of hotels, but I've heard rumors that she's involved with some darker dealings, corporate sabotage, blackmail, you name it. But I don't know how deep it goes. All I know is that she's not someone you want to cross. The name Clara Voss struck a chord with Ethan. He'd heard of her, of course. Everyone in the hotel industry had. She was a shrewd businesswoman, cutthroat and unapologetic. Her reputation was one of ruthless ambition. But he never imagined she would go to such lengths, manipulating someone within his own company. Maya, get me everything we can find on her. Contacts, financials, anything that ties her to this operation. We need to know exactly who we're dealing with, Ethan ordered, his voice calm but determined. Maya nodded, already pulling out her phone to start the search. I'll get on it right away. Ethan turned back to Jordan, his gaze hardening. And you, Jordan, you'll help us get close to her. You'll be our inside man. You owe it to us now to fix what you've broken. Jordan nodded, his face pale. I'll do whatever it takes. I never meant for things to get this far. I didn't know how to stop it. I'm not giving you a choice, Ethan said coldly. If you want to make up for your mistakes, this is your chance. The room fell silent as Maya worked, her fingers tapping rapidly on her phone screen. Ethan kept his eyes on Jordan, weighing the situation. He didn't trust him fully, not yet. But Jordan was the key to breaking this wide open. If he could get close enough to Clara Voss, they could take down the entire operation. Minutes felt like hours as Maya scrolled through her phone, muttering under her breath as she worked. Ethan leaned against the desk, his mind racing. He had built everything he had from the ground up, and now it was all at risk. This was no longer just about the hotel or the competition. It was personal. Finally, Maya looked up, her expression grim. I found something. Clara Voss has a meeting scheduled at one of her properties tonight. It's not listed on her public calendar, so it's likely a covert meeting. I think it's with the group Jordan's been working with. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was the break they needed. Where is it? Maya quickly showed him the location. It was a hotel owned by one of Clara Voss's chains, located in a secluded area outside the city. A perfect place for a clandestine meeting. We need to go now, Ethan said, standing up and grabbing his coat. Jordan, you're coming with us. I don't care how you get us in, but you will. Jordan looked nervous, his hands shaking slightly. What if she knows about me? What if she's already figured out I'm the one who's been leaking information? Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we move fast. We don't have time for doubts. You've got one chance to make this right, Jordan. Don't waste it. The three of them quickly left the office, making their way to the car. The tension in the air was thick, but Ethan couldn't afford to let fear hold him back. They were about to step into the lion's den, and they needed to be ready for whatever they would face. As the car sped down the highway, Ethan's mind kept returning to Clara Voss. If she was behind all of this, then she was just as dangerous as Jordan had described. Ruthless, calculating, and willing to go to any length to get what she wanted. This was more than just a business rivalry. This was a battle for control, for survival, and Ethan wasn't about to lose everything he had worked for without a fight. The night air was thick with anticipation as Ethan, Maya, and Jordan approached the secluded hotel. The towering building stood like a silent sentinel, its dim lights casting long shadows over the quiet parking lot. The surrounding area was eerily still, as if the world outside had forgotten about this place. Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't just any hotel, it was a fortress. Clara Voss knew how to protect her interests, and that meant surveillance, security, and hidden dangers lurking in every corner. As he looked at the building, he wondered what other secrets it held. Jordan, are you sure this is the place? Maya asked, her voice laced with doubt. Jordan's eyes flickered nervously. I've never been here before, but this is where the meeting is supposed to be. I overheard a conversation about it, and I know Clara Voss is involved with some serious people. If we're not careful, we might walk straight into a trap. Ethan looked at him sharply. We're not backing out now. You said you wanted to make things right. This is your shot, Jordan. Jordan nodded, swallowing hard. I'll do what I can. Just be careful. The car came to a stop in front of the hotel. Ethan didn't waste time. He grabbed his phone and sent a quick message to Maya to cover their tracks. If things went south, they needed to be ready to disappear without a trace. Stay alert, Ethan said as he opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. We don't know who's inside or what they'll be expecting. We move fast, no hesitation. Maya was already by his side, and Jordan was trailing behind them, his hands trembling. They made their way toward the entrance, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The hotel's glass doors loomed ahead, uninviting, like the mouth of a beast ready to swallow them whole. As they entered, the atmosphere inside was strangely calm. The lobby was luxurious, but cold. A marble floor stretched out in front of them, its polished surface reflecting the muted light from the crystal chandeliers hanging above. There was no one behind the reception desk. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, looking for any signs of danger. The security cameras were hard to spot, but he knew they were there. He'd been in enough high-end hotels to recognize the subtle surveillance systems that ran behind the scenes. But there was something else, something off about the way the air felt. It was as if they were being watched, even though no one seemed to be around. A voice broke the silence. "Can I help you?" Ethan turned to find a tall man standing at the entrance to a hallway. He was impeccably dressed, his suit dark and perfectly tailored, his face unreadable. A bodyguard, most likely. "We're here for the meeting," Ethan said, his voice steady but with an edge of authority. "We're expected." The man didn't flinch. "Do you have an invitation?" "We were told to come," Maya added, stepping forward. "The person we're meeting is expecting us." The man's gaze shifted to Jordan, who was looking more and more nervous by the second. Ethan could see the slight tension in the bodyguard's posture as he assessed them, his eyes flickering briefly to the back of the room before returning to them. "I'll need to verify your identities," the man said, his voice a low murmur. Ethan's mind raced. They had to stay calm. "We don't have time for this. Tell Clara Voss we're here. Now." The bodyguard remained unmoving, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You'll wait here. I'll make a call." Ethan clenched his fists at his sides, fighting the urge to push past the man. He had to stay composed. The last thing they needed was to blow their cover before they had the chance to learn anything. The bodyguard walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Ethan exchanged a glance with Maya, who nodded. They had no choice but to wait. But the longer they stood there, the more Ethan felt like they were walking straight into a trap. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every sound in the hotel seemed amplified, footsteps echoing in the distance, the hum of the air conditioning. Jordan stood close behind them, his nervous energy palpable. Finally, the bodyguard returned. He didn't speak at first, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. "You can come with me." Without saying another word, he turned and led them down the long hallway. Ethan's senses were on high alert. He could feel the weight of the moment, the tension building with every step. There was no turning back now. They arrived at a large set of double doors. The bodyguard stopped, his hand resting on the handle. "This is it. Be prepared for anything." The doors swung open, and they stepped into a dimly lit room. At the far end of the room stood Clara Voss, her silhouette framed by the glow of a desk lamp. She was standing next to a tall, broad-shouldered man whose face was obscured by shadow. Clara's eyes narrowed as they entered, her lips curling into a cold smile. "Ethan Carter, I've been expecting you." Ethan didn't flinch. He had come this far. Now, he would find out exactly how deep this conspiracy ran. "You've been a hard man to reach, Mr. Carter," Clara continued, her voice smooth, almost mocking. "I must admit, I'm impressed by your persistence, but I'm afraid you've come to the wrong place. This meeting wasn't meant for you." "I'm not here for a meeting, Clara," Ethan replied, his tone unwavering. "I'm here to end this. You've made a mistake, and now you'll pay for it." The man next to her stepped forward, his expression a hard mask. "I suggest you leave now, Mr. Carter, before things get messy." Ethan stood tall, his mind racing with possibilities. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, he was prepared to fight. The room seemed to close in around Ethan as Clara Voss's piercing gaze locked onto him. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. Ethan took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes never leaving Clara's cold, calculating expression. Beside her, the tall man, who still hadn't revealed his identity, sized them up with a look of disdain. "You're wasting your time, Carter," Clara said, her voice smooth but laced with venom. "You should have stayed in your lane. You're in over your head now." Ethan's pulse raced, but he held his ground. "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to put an end to this. Whatever you're planning, it ends tonight." Clara raised an eyebrow, an almost imperceptible shift in her posture. "You think you're in control here, don't you? You're just a pawn, a small cog in a much larger machine. The people behind all this, they're not ones you want to cross." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the man beside her. The man had a look of quiet menace, but he remained silent, observing them like a predator sizing up its prey. The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Maya and Jordan stayed close, the tension among them palpable. "I've seen what you've done to people," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. You think you can intimidate me, Clara? You're wrong. Clara's lips twisted into a small smile. Intimidation? No, Mr. Carter. I don't need to intimidate you. I've already won. Everything that's happening right now, every move you make, it's all according to plan. Ethan's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. You've been running around, thinking you're the hero, but you've been too blinded by your own righteousness to see the truth. All of this, the meetings, the secrets, the lies, it was never about you. It's about something much bigger, something you wouldn't understand. The man beside her chuckled, his deep voice a low rumble. She's right, Carter. You've been a distraction at best. You've been chasing shadows. But what Clara is talking about, well, that's something you'll never be able to stop. Ethan's mind spun, but he refused to let his composure crack. Who are you? What do you want from us? Clara's smile widened. You really don't get it, do you? I'm not here to make deals. I'm here to take control. This world is changing, and the people like me, people who have power, influence, and resources, will be the ones shaping the future. You? You're just a bump in the road. Jordan stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. This is about money, isn't it? The power, the control. It's all about what you can take from people. Clara's gaze flickered toward Jordan, a brief flash of amusement in her eyes. It's about more than that. Money isn't the endgame here. It's about control. Control over information, control over lives, control over everything. And once we have that power, no one will stand in our way. Ethan's chest tightened, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. I don't care what your plan is. I'm stopping you, Clara, whatever it takes. Clara's eyes darkened, her smile fading into a cold, menacing expression. You're delusional if you think you can stop me. You're already too far into this. You've crossed lines you can never uncross. And if you think you can just walk out of here with your life, you're gravely mistaken. The tall man beside her moved for the first time, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. His eyes were cold, assessing, like a predator eyeing its prey. You've made your decision, Carter. Now you'll have to face the consequences. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to act, but he knew rushing into a confrontation would be a mistake. Clara had already shown she wasn't afraid to use force to get what she wanted, and he had no idea how far her reach extended. Still, he couldn't back down. Not now. Maya stepped forward, her hand reaching for Ethan's arm, her voice urgent. We need to leave. We're not ready for this. We don't know what they have planned. Ethan's eyes never left Clara. We're not going anywhere. Clara's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating fury. You think you have the power here, Carter, but you don't. I've already won. The only thing left is for you to realize it. The room was quiet for a moment, each person waiting for the other to make the next move. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting. He was walking a fine line. One wrong step and they could all be in danger. But he couldn't afford to show weakness. We'll see about that, Ethan said through gritted teeth. Clara's smirk deepened. You'll see more than that. You'll see exactly what happens when you try to stand in my way. Suddenly, the tall man stepped forward, his movements swift and decisive. Ethan instinctively moved to block Maya and Jordan, but it was too late. The man's hand shot out, grabbing Ethan by the collar and lifting him off the ground with unnerving ease. His grip was like iron, his strength overwhelming. You'll regret this, the man growled, his breath hot against Ethan's ear. Ethan fought to keep his composure, every muscle in his body tense. I'm not afraid of you. Clara stepped forward, watching the scene with detached amusement. Oh, you should be. The man tightened his grip, lifting Ethan higher. Ethan's feet dangled in the air, his mind racing. He needed to think fast. In a split second, he brought his knee up hard into the man's stomach, forcing a grunt of pain from him. The man staggered back, giving Ethan just enough room to break free. With his heart pounding, Ethan regained his footing and looked at Clara, his eyes burning with resolve. I won't stop, not until you're taken down. Clara's eyes narrowed, the threat clear in her gaze. We'll see how long your resolve lasts. Ethan's hands were trembling slightly as he regained his balance, still staring at Clara Voss. His breath came in ragged gasps as he fought to keep his cool. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when things were getting this intense. He knew he had to keep his mind sharp. The tall man stepped back, rubbing his stomach where Ethan had landed the knee. His dark eyes glinted with a mixture of annoyance and admiration. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," he muttered, almost to himself. But the look in his eyes said it all. He was still willing to do whatever it took to neutralize Ethan. Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she took a slow step forward, her heels clicking like a metronome in the otherwise silent room. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Carter. You had your warning, and now you're choosing to fight a battle you'll never win." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You can't keep threatening us, Clara. It's not going to scare me." Clara's lips twisted into a smirk. "No, but it will make you think twice before you act. Every move you make, every piece of information you uncover, every person you involve, there's a cost. You're not the only one with a hand to play, and you'll soon learn just how far my reach really extends." The air in the room was thick with the promise of impending violence, but Ethan wasn't backing down. Clara was right about one thing. He had already crossed a line, and there was no going back. But there was one thing she didn't understand. He wasn't just fighting for his own life anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had been hurt by her organization. And that meant he'd go to the ends of the earth if necessary. "You're right about one thing," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, the threat in his words clear. "There's no turning back now. So go ahead. Threaten me, try to break me, but it won't change a damn thing. I'm still coming for you." For a moment, Clara's gaze softened, just a fraction. But it was enough to make Ethan pause. She seemed to be calculating something, some move, some strategy he couldn't quite see. Then, just as quickly, the moment passed, and her smile returned, colder than before. "Bold words," she replied, her voice smooth like silk but cutting like a blade. "But talk is cheap, Carter. Let's see how well you hold up when everything you care about starts slipping through your fingers." Ethan's eyes narrowed. He could hear the unspoken threat in her words, but he wouldn't flinch. Not now. He wasn't sure exactly how far Clara was willing to go, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her continue operating unchecked. Her empire of manipulation and power needed to come to an end, and he was the one who was going to bring it down. Clara nodded to the man beside her, signaling him to step forward again. He seemed more relaxed this time, like he knew that any further action would escalate things to a point of no return. "We don't need to do this the hard way, Carter," Clara said, her eyes flashing dangerously. "You're out of your depth. You can't stop what's already in motion. And the people you care about, well, they'll be caught in the crossfire." Ethan could feel the weight of her words sinking in. Maya and Jordan were both standing close, their eyes wide with uncertainty. This was bigger than them all, and Ethan knew that each step forward could drag them deeper into danger. But there was no turning back now. "I won't let you hurt them," Ethan said firmly, his voice unwavering. Clara's smile faltered, just for a split second, but the moment was fleeting. "You don't get it, do you? You're already too late. The wheels are already turning. Your efforts to stop us have already triggered something much larger than you realize." Ethan's mind raced. What did she mean? What larger plan was she talking about? The tall man stepped closer, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "Clara's right," he said, his voice low but menacing. "This is bigger than you think. You're just a pawn in a much larger game. And we're done playing nice." Before Ethan could respond, the man lunged forward, moving with a speed that caught him off guard. Ethan had barely time to react as the man's hand wrapped around his throat, lifting him off the ground with one powerful motion. "Let him go," Maya screamed, her voice breaking with fear, but the man didn't even acknowledge her. Ethan struggled against the iron grip, his vision beginning to fade as he tried to pry the man's fingers from his neck. The pressure was suffocating, and for a moment, he thought he might black out. But then something inside him snapped. His anger fueled his strength. With a last burst of energy, Ethan reached up, grabbing the man's wrist and pulling with everything he had. The man's grip loosened just enough for Ethan to slam his knee up into his attacker's abdomen, forcing him back just enough for Ethan to break free. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, his heart pounding in his chest. Maya was at his side instantly, helping him to his feet. Jordan, too, had his back, looking every bit as determined as Ethan felt. They were a team now, and despite the odds, they were going to fight this. Clara's expression hardened. She had seen this before, resistance, but she wasn't finished yet. "You're stronger than I expected, Carter," she said, her voice calm but still laced with contempt. "But don't think for a second that you've won. This is just the beginning. You'll see soon enough just how outmatched you really are." Ethan stood tall, his breath steady now, his resolve clear. "I'm not going anywhere, Clara. You're the one who's going down." The atmosphere in the room was thick with a sense of inevitability. Ethan could feel the weight of Clara's gaze on him, sharp and calculating. Despite the earlier confrontation, something told him that the battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Clara's cold smile lingered, though there was a hint of frustration beneath her calm exterior. She hadn't expected Ethan to be so resilient, to fight back the way he had. It wasn't something she had planned for. But even in his defiance, she knew the truth. He was playing a dangerous game, one that she was far more equipped to win. Ethan stood tall, his breath steady now, though his body still ached from the previous struggle. His eyes locked with Clara's, unwavering. "You think this is over?" Clara's voice was smooth, but there was a faint edge of irritation in it. "You've underestimated me, Carter. You're not just fighting me anymore. You're fighting everything I've built." Ethan clenched his fists. He had been up against some powerful enemies before, but Clara was different. She was ruthless, methodical, and had every angle covered. But Ethan had something she didn't: the determination to see this through, no matter the cost. "I'm not scared of you, Clara," he said, his voice low and steady. "You can threaten me all you want, but I'm not backing down." Clara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "You should be, Carter. Because if you think this is about you, then you're sorely mistaken. This is about a legacy, a system that I've spent years building. You think you're the first person to try and tear it down?" Ethan wasn't sure what she meant by system, but he could sense the underlying power behind her words. Whatever it was far-reaching, beyond what he had originally thought. His mind raced, trying to piece together the information he had so far, but Clara was always one step ahead, keeping the crucial details just out of his reach. "Tell me what it is you're really after," Ethan said, his voice sharp. "What's this all really about?" Clara didn't immediately respond. Instead, she glanced at the tall man beside her, who was now standing a few steps behind her with his arms crossed. He gave a slight nod, as if confirming something, and then turned his gaze back to Ethan. "We don't need to explain ourselves to you," Clara said, her tone cold. "But let's just say that what we've built is bigger than you can possibly imagine. You're playing a losing hand, Carter, and sooner or later, you'll understand that." Ethan's frustration flared. He didn't care about Clara's cryptic words. He needed to know what she was planning, what she was capable of, and he was willing to do whatever it took to stop her. Before he could respond, Clara raised a hand, signaling the tall man to step forward again. This time, the man moved more slowly, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. Ethan braced himself for another round of confrontation, but the man merely stood there, watching him intently. "You're making a big mistake," Clara said, her voice cutting through the silence. "But I'll give you this: you've got guts. You've made it this far, against all odds. But it's not enough." Ethan's mind was working overtime now. What was her endgame? What exactly was she planning to do with all this power? He knew that if he didn't figure it out soon, he would be too far behind to stop her. The tall man stepped forward, his face a mask of indifference. "You should walk away now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is your last warning." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't flinch. He had come too far to turn back now. "I'm not going anywhere. If you think you can intimidate me into backing down, you've got another thing coming." Clara let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about intimidation. This is about power. and you don't have it. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Then why am I still standing here? Clara's smile returned, colder than before. Because you think you're in control. But trust me, Carter, you're just a pawn in a much bigger game. The man beside her took another step forward, and for a brief moment, Ethan thought he might be about to strike. But instead, he stopped and turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. Are we done here? The man asked, his voice calm but laced with impatience. Clara studied Ethan for a long moment before nodding. For now. But remember, Carter, you're playing with fire. And sooner or later, you'll get burned. With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, the tall man following close behind. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Ethan, Maya, and Jordan standing in the middle of the room, the tension still hanging heavy in the air. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The encounter had left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Clara wasn't going to back down, and neither was he. We need to figure out what she's really after, Ethan said, his voice firm. This isn't over. Maya nodded, her expression serious. But we're going to need more than just guts to take her down. We need a plan. Ethan glanced at Jordan, who had been eerily quiet throughout the entire confrontation. His eyes were filled with determination, but there was also a sense of wariness in them. I'm in, Jordan said finally, but we need to move fast. The more we wait, the more time Clara has to build whatever it is she's planning. Ethan agreed. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. Clara was getting closer to whatever her endgame was, and if they didn't act soon, it might be too late. The next morning, Ethan's mind was already racing. The encounter with Clara and her intimidating presence had left a mark on him. There was something chilling about how she operated, a sense of calm power, as though nothing could shake her control. But Ethan wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when he had come so far. He sat at his desk, going over the details from the night before. There had to be something he missed. Clara had been cryptic, but that didn't mean he couldn't find the missing pieces of the puzzle. Every word, every gesture, it was all part of a bigger picture. Maya stood by the window, her arms crossed as she stared out at the skyline. The tension in the air was palpable. She knew what was at stake here. They couldn't just play defense anymore. They needed to take action. But how? I've been thinking, Maya said, breaking the silence. Clara's not just some corporate shark. She's got something bigger going on. This system she keeps talking about, it sounds like more than just money and power. Ethan turned to face her, nodding in agreement. Exactly. And whatever it is, it's more than just a personal vendetta. It's methodical, planned. And that's what worries me. I did some digging last night, Maya continued, her voice quiet but determined. I found a few things, connections that go beyond Clara's company. She's involved with organizations, people that seem to operate in the shadows. And there's something about her family. They've been in this game for decades. Ethan's pulse quickened. What do you mean? What kind of organizations? Maya paused, looking at her phone before showing Ethan a series of encrypted files. I can't access everything, but it's enough. Clara's father, Victor Ashford, has ties to some high-profile individuals. Powerful politicians, business tycoons, even military contractors. And these aren't just casual associations. They've been working together for years. Ethan's mind raced. Victor Ashford. The name was familiar, but not in a way that immediately connected to Clara. But what Maya was saying couldn't be ignored. This was bigger than a corporate rivalry. It was a web of influence and power that spanned far beyond what he had originally thought. You're telling me she's connected to these people? Ethan asked, his voice low. Her father's involved with military contractors? Maya nodded grimly. Exactly. And it's not just any contracts. They're involved in shady operations, things that are off the books. If Clara's involved in this, then she's not just fighting for control of a company. She's part of something much larger. And that's dangerous. Ethan stood up, pacing the room as he processed the information. This was no longer just about taking down a corporate leader. This was about exposing a network that could have global ramifications. And Clara Ashford wasn't just some player in it. She was a mastermind. We need to find out everything we can about this network, Ethan said, his voice sharp with determination. But we can't do it alone. We need to be smart. We need to stay one step ahead of her. Just then, Jordan entered the room, his expression serious. I've been talking to some people, he said. I think I've got a lead on one of Clara's associates, a guy named Jack Mulder. He's been seen around Ashford Enterprises for years, but his background is a mystery. Maya raised an eyebrow. A mystery? How so? He's listed as a consultant, but no one knows exactly what he does. I've got a contact who might know more about him. If we can get to him, we might be able to get some real answers about Clara's plans, Jordan explained. Ethan nodded. All right, let's move on this. We need to find out what Mulder knows. He might be the key to getting closer to Clara's operation. Maya glanced at her phone, checking the time. I've got a friend who can help us track him down. We'll need to move fast. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. They were finally starting to piece together the puzzle. Clara's empire was far more complex than he had imagined, but they were close, closer than ever, to unraveling her secrets. They left the office quickly, the weight of the mission heavy on their shoulders. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city streets as they moved with purpose, determined to follow the trail wherever it led. The plan was simple. Find Jack Mulder, learn what he knew, and use it to get closer to Clara. It wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to be without risks. But they had no choice. This was their only chance. As they made their way through the city, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was an instinct that had served him well in the past, and now it was flaring up again. But by the time they reached the location where Mulder was rumored to be, the streets were quiet, too quiet. Ethan signaled to Maya and Jordan, his hand moving instinctively to the gun tucked beneath his jacket. They couldn't afford to be careless now, not with Clara's shadow looming over them. Maya stepped forward, her expression sharp. This is it. We need to be ready for anything. Ethan nodded, his mind focused entirely on what was to come. They had come this far, and they weren't about to stop now. Ethan, Maya, and Jordan moved cautiously through the dimly lit alley, their footsteps muffled by the thick fog that had rolled in over the city. The air was thick with tension, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. It was almost as if someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. He glanced over his shoulder, but the street was empty, save for the occasional flicker of a neon sign. They reached a small, unmarked door at the back of a nondescript building. The door was cracked open, just enough to suggest someone was inside. Maya gave Ethan a subtle nod, signaling that it was time to move. Without a word, they approached the door, Ethan's hand brushing the cool metal of the handle. Maya took a deep breath before pushing the door open, her eyes scanning the room. The interior was sparse, with only a few chairs and a dimly lit desk in the center. At the desk sat a man, his back to them, hunched over a stack of papers. His graying hair and wrinkled face made it clear that he wasn't a young man, but his posture suggested that he had seen a lot in his years. His name, as they had learned, was Jack Mulder. Mulder? Ethan called out, his voice steady but tinged with authority. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even turn around. Instead, he reached for a glass of water on the desk, taking a slow sip as though he had been expecting them. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. You've come to ask questions, but I'm not in the mood for answers today. Ethan's eyes narrowed. There was something unsettling about the way Mulder spoke, something that hinted at a deep understanding of what was at stake. It wasn't fear in his voice, but something more dangerous, resignation. We're not here to play games, Maya said, her tone sharp. We need information about Clara Ashford. We know you're involved with her operation, and we know you can help us. Mulder turned in his chair slowly, his expression unreadable. Involved? Maybe. Help you? I'm not so sure about that. Ethan stepped forward, his patience thinning. Listen, Mulder, we don't have time to waste. Clara's playing a game that none of us can afford to lose. You know that better than anyone. So either you help us or what? Mulder interrupted, his voice suddenly cold. You think you can scare me? I've been in this game for longer than you can imagine. Clara's not the only one with power, and there are more dangerous people than her behind all of this. You think I'm afraid of your threats? Ethan's heart raced. Mulder wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a game to him. He had lived through the same ruthless world that Clara had grown up in, a world of shadows, manipulation, and power that stretched beyond the law. Maya stepped in, her voice calm but insistent. "We're not here to threaten you, Mulder. We just need to know what you know. Help us stop Clara before she does something irreversible. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about something much bigger." For a moment, Mulder stared at her, as if sizing up whether or not to trust them. The silence stretched on, until finally, he spoke. "Fine. I'll tell you what I know. But know this, getting involved with Clara is a dangerous game. And once you start, there's no going back." He leaned forward, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. Clara didn't just inherit her father's business. She inherited a legacy. A network that stretches from corporate boardrooms to political backrooms, from foreign markets to military contracts. She's not just playing with money and influence. She's playing with people's lives. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What do you mean by that?" Mulder's eyes flickered with something. Regret, perhaps, or warning. Clara's father, Victor Ashford, was always about control. But Clara? She's different. She wants to change the game, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to win. Maya's brow furrowed. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" Mulder sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "She's not just building a business empire. She's building a network, a system. It's all about power. Real power. The kind that makes governments bend to your will. The kind that controls everything." Ethan exchanged a look with Maya. This was worse than they had imagined. "And you're a part of this?" Jordan asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Mulder's lips curled into a wry smile. "I was. I'm not anymore. But once you're in, it's hard to get out. Clara's not someone you can just walk away from. And if you think you can take her down, you're going to need more than just information. You're going to need allies, powerful allies." Ethan clenched his fists. They were so close, yet so far. Clara was part of a machine, and she was playing a game that only the most dangerous players could understand. But the more they learned, the clearer it became. Taking her down would be a fight for everything they held dear. "What do we do now?" Maya asked, her voice resolute. Mulder leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "You're going to need to get to her father. Victor Ashford is the key. But getting to him isn't going to be easy. He's always one step ahead, and he's got eyes everywhere. If you really want to stop Clara, you'll need to go through him." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. They were no longer just fighting Clara. They were fighting a system, one that was woven into the very fabric of power. But they had no choice. They had come too far to turn back. "We'll do whatever it takes," Ethan said, his voice low but filled with conviction. Mulder's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Then get ready for war." Ethan's mind raced as they left the room, Mulder's cryptic warning echoing in his thoughts. He had known the stakes were high, but the truth was more daunting than he had imagined. Clara Ashford wasn't just a businesswoman with too much power. She was the head of an underground empire, pulling strings that reached into places they couldn't even begin to understand. The fog outside had thickened, and the city's skyline was nothing more than a blur of lights in the distance. As they walked to their car, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he instinctively reached for the gun tucked under his jacket, the cold steel offering little comfort. "We need to move faster," Maya said, her voice clipped. "If what Mulder said is true, we're running out of time." Ethan nodded, his thoughts a whirlwind. "We can't just go after Clara. We need to get to her father, Victor Ashford." Mulder's right. He's the key. Jordan was unusually quiet, his eyes darting around as though he, too, sensed the invisible presence that loomed over them. "How do we even find him?" Mulder didn't exactly give us a blueprint to follow. "I've got a contact," Maya replied, her voice steady. "A former ally of Ashford's who knows how to get to him. We meet them tonight, in a safe house on the outskirts of town. They can point us in the right direction." Ethan's gaze flicked to Maya, the trust between them unspoken but strong. "Is this contact reliable?" She hesitated for a moment, then met his eyes. "They are. But they're also someone we need to be careful with. The people who run in Ashford's circle don't just disappear without a reason. Our contacts got a few skeletons in their closet. We'll need to watch our backs. The car ride was tense, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on their shoulders. Ethan stared out the window, watching the darkened streets blur past. Every corner seemed to hold a threat, every shadow a potential enemy. They were no longer just hunting Clara, they were stepping into a war, one that they might not be ready for. The safe house was located in an industrial district, far from the prying eyes of the city. It was the kind of place that looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and the exterior covered in graffiti. Ethan didn't trust it, but Maya had been to worse places, and if this contact could help them, it was worth the risk. They pulled up to the building, and Maya got out first, checking the area before signaling for Ethan and Jordan to follow. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside was stale, and the faint smell of dust and mold lingered in the corners. It felt like a place forgotten by time, and that was exactly the kind of place a man like Ashford would use for his secrets. As they moved through the corridor, they reached a door at the end of the hall. Maya knocked twice, sharp, deliberate, and waited. Moments later, the door opened, revealing a man dressed in a worn leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His face was obscured in shadow, but Ethan could tell he was sizing them up, looking for something in their demeanor. "You Maya?" the man asked, his voice gruff. Maya didn't answer immediately. She just nodded, her eyes never leaving his. The man stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. Inside, the room was sparsely furnished, with just a few chairs and a table cluttered with papers. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the walls. The man pointed to the table. "Sit. We don't have much time." Ethan's senses were on high alert as they took their seats. He didn't trust this man, but he was willing to listen. The sooner they got the information they needed, the sooner they could move on Ashford and end this. The man sat down opposite them, his eyes flicking between Maya and Ethan. "You're looking for Ashford, huh?" Ethan nodded. "We need to find him. Now." The man leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You don't just find Victor Ashford. He finds you. He's not some petty criminal you can track down with a few phone calls. He's a ghost. You won't find him unless he wants you to." "Then how do we find him?" Maya demanded, her patience wearing thin. The man chuckled darkly. "You won't like it, but if you're serious about this, I'll give you a lead. It's dangerous, though. Ashford's not the kind of guy you confront in the open. You have to get to him through his people, and his people are loyal. They'll die for him without question." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the man. "We're ready to do whatever it takes." The man's eyes flickered with something, a mixture of pity and calculation. "Fine. There's a nightclub in the city. It's owned by one of Ashford's associates. The name's Red Horizon. If you want to get to Ashford, you need to start there. That's where the deals are made, the deals that matter. But be careful, this place isn't just a nightclub. It's a front. And the people inside? They'll kill you if they think you're a threat." Jordan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "How do we even get in?" The man smirked. "You don't get in. You get invited. And that means you'll need to make yourself useful to the right people. They won't let you in unless they see something they want from you. But if you play your cards right, you might get a chance to speak with Ashford's inner circle." Ethan didn't hesitate. "We'll do it." The man stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Then be prepared. Red Horizon's a different world. Once you're in, there's no turning back." As they left the safe house, Ethan's mind was spinning. A nightclub? An invitation? This wasn't just about finding Ashford anymore. It was about surviving the game he had built. Ethan wasn't sure if they were ready, but he knew one thing for certain. They had no choice but to play. The neon lights of the city blurred as they drove through the streets, casting an eerie glow on the empty roads. Ethan's mind kept replaying the words of their contact, Red Horizon. It sounded like a club, but everything about it felt wrong. There was no way in hell this was just a place for partying. Ashford's operation was too large, too secretive for that. It was a hub, a meeting place for those who worked in the shadows. Ethan could already feel the weight of their next move pressing down on him. What were they walking into? The idea of infiltrating a place like that. where even the smallest misstep could cost them their lives, was unnerving. But they had no choice. If they wanted to get closer to Ashford, they had to risk it. "I still don't like this," Jordan muttered from the back seat. He had been unusually quiet during the drive, his earlier confidence replaced by a quiet tension. "This whole thing feels like we're walking straight into a trap." "I know," Maya said, her grip tight on the steering wheel. "But we don't have time for hesitation. If we don't take this chance, we'll lose Ashford forever." Ethan nodded. His own unease was starting to sink in, but he couldn't afford to let it show. Not now. He had come too far to turn back. When they arrived at Red Horizon, the place looked like any other high-end club from the outside. A sleek, modern building, its windows darkened, music pulsating from within. But something in the air felt different, like the club was a living thing, watching, waiting. The street outside was eerily quiet for a Friday night, and no one seemed to be in a rush to enter. Maya slowed the car, parking a few blocks down. She didn't want to draw attention. The last thing they needed was to be noticed too soon. "We wait here until we get the signal," Maya instructed, her eyes scanning the street. "We'll need to make an entrance that doesn't scream outsiders. If anyone gets suspicious, we're done." Ethan couldn't help but wonder how they were supposed to blend in with the people inside. It wasn't like they were wearing tuxedos or designer dresses. But Maya was right. They couldn't afford to make themselves targets. Time seemed to stretch as they waited. Every car that passed, every shadow that moved in the dark felt like a potential threat. Ethan's fingers tapped rhythmically against the armrest, his anxiety building with each passing second. Then, like clockwork, a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of the club. The driver, a tall, imposing figure, opened the back door for a well-dressed woman to exit. She was dressed in a long, flowing black dress that shimmered in the dim light, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Maya's eyes narrowed. "That's our inn." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his confusion growing. "That's Monica Vale," Maya explained, her voice low. "She's one of Ashford's key people. She's been known to make the rounds at Red Horizon to handle business deals. If she's there tonight, it's our chance to get inside." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment they had been waiting for, but it didn't come without risks. "Are we supposed to just walk up to her and ask for an invitation?" Maya shook her head. "No, but we need to get her attention. We need to show we're useful. The people inside will be watching, and we can't afford to look like we don't belong." They watched as Monica entered the club, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked up the steps. A few moments later, the heavy doors swung open, and she disappeared inside. "Now," Maya said, her voice firm, "we go in." They exited the car quickly, walking toward the club with purpose. The closer they got, the more the tension in the air seemed to build. It was as though the club itself was alive, a place that had seen more than its fair share of dangerous transactions. At the entrance, a burly bouncer stood with his arms crossed. He eyed them up and down, his gaze hard and calculating. "You got an invitation?" he asked, his voice gruff. Ethan's stomach dropped. The bouncer's gaze lingered for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. This was it. This was the test. The moment where everything could fall apart. Maya stepped forward confidently, her posture unwavering. "We're here to meet Monica Vale. We've got business." The bouncer didn't move, his expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he grunted and stepped aside. "Go ahead. Don't make trouble." Ethan exhaled in relief, his body relaxing only slightly as they walked inside. The club was like nothing he had ever seen. The lights were dim but hypnotic, casting strange shadows across the sleek black walls. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and alcohol. The music was deep, a constant low thrum that seemed to vibrate in Ethan's chest. But despite the luxury, there was something off about the place. The people here didn't look like they were there for fun. They were all too focused, too intent on their own business. As they moved through the crowd, Ethan's senses went into overdrive. There were eyes on them, watching from every corner. No one seemed to acknowledge their presence, but he could feel the scrutiny. They were being judged. Maya led them toward the back, where a large bar stood in the corner. Monica Vale was seated there, a drink in hand, talking to a well-dressed man who appeared to be a regular at the club. Maya didn't hesitate. She made her way straight to them, walking with purpose. Monica looked up as they approached, her expression unreadable. She took a long sip of her drink, then set it down slowly on the bar. Maya, I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be here either, Maya said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But I have business with your boss, and I thought you could help. Monica's lips curled into a smile that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. Business with my boss, huh? I don't know if you know what you're getting into. I know exactly what I'm getting into, Maya said, her voice low. I think you know what I mean. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that stretched out like a thin thread ready to snap. Then Monica leaned forward slightly. You want to talk to Ashford, huh? You're not the first person who's come looking for him. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was it, the first step toward finding Ashford. Well, Monica continued, her voice smooth like honey, you'll need more than just a smile and a pretty face to get to him. Ethan swallowed. This was going to be harder than they had imagined. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Monica's gaze flickered over Ethan and Jordan, her eyes lingering on them for a moment before she turned her attention back to Maya. Her lips curled into a small, almost amused smile. You really think you can just walk in here and get Ashford's attention like that? Monica asked, her voice smooth, almost teasing. He's not someone you can just ask for a favor, Maya. You should know that by now. Maya didn't flinch. Her calm demeanor never wavered. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm here to make him an offer. Monica raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. An offer? Now that's interesting. What makes you think he'll even entertain it? What makes you think you're worth his time? Ethan felt the heat of her gaze on him, and for a moment, he wondered if Monica could see through their facade. They weren't exactly in a position to make demands, but Maya had a plan. She always had a plan. You're underestimating me, Maya said with a quiet confidence. I don't need to be worth his time. I just need to make him see that he can't afford to ignore me. Monica's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a look of curiosity. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't get you far in this world. It takes more than just confidence to play in Ashford's league. The words stung, but Maya wasn't shaken. She had fought her way to this moment, and nothing would stop her now. I'm not here to play, Monica. I'm here to win. The room around them seemed to grow quieter, as if the club itself was holding its breath. The people at the bar, the dancers in the corner, and the shadowy figures in the booths all seemed to be watching with quiet interest, their attention fixed on the interaction. Ethan felt the weight of their gaze, but he kept his expression neutral. Monica studied Maya for a moment longer, then shifted her gaze to Ethan and Jordan, sizing them up. Ethan stood tall, trying his best to project an air of calm confidence, though his mind was racing. They were getting closer, but the more they pushed, the greater the danger became. If they miscalculated, they could all end up as little more than collateral damage in Ashford's game. Finally, Monica leaned back in her seat, her eyes glinting with something darker. Fine, she said, her voice laced with challenge. You want a shot at Ashford, you'll need to prove you're not just another wannabe. And let's be clear, you don't get to just walk in here and waltz out with his attention. You've got to earn it. Maya nodded, unfazed by the challenge. Tell me what I need to do. Monica's gaze flickered to the side for a brief moment, and then she looked back at them with a sly smile. There's a man in this club, someone who thinks he can make a name for himself by going after Ashford. He's trying to get in on the operation, but he's not the right kind of player. If you take care of him, show me you can handle business like that, then I'll see about arranging a meeting with Ashford. But I'm warning you now, it won't be easy. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The opportunity was there, but it came with its own risks. They didn't know who this man was, or how dangerous he might be. But if this was the only way to get closer to Ashford, they had no choice. Maya's eyes narrowed. Who is he? Monica's lips curled again, this time into a grin that seemed to carry an unsettling promise. His name's Roland Voss. He's a player, all right, but he's way out of his depth. I think he'll make a nice example for you to show me what you're capable of. Ethan exchanged a glance with Maya. Roland Voss. They had heard the name before. He was known in certain circles, a fixer who got things done when the price was right. But he wasn't exactly someone they had expected to encounter tonight. Still, they had no choice. They had to move forward. "We'll take care of him," Maya said, her voice sharp. Monica's eyes glinted with approval. "I'll be watching. Don't disappoint me." Without another word, she stood up, tossing a few bills onto the bar before turning to leave. As she walked away, her presence seemed to fill the room, commanding attention even in her absence. Maya turned to Ethan and Jordan. "This is it," she said, her voice low but determined. "We don't have a choice now. If we want to get to Ashford, we take down Voss. We make a statement, and we show them we mean business." Ethan's pulse raced, his mind calculating their next move. He had no illusions about what this would mean. Roland Voss wasn't someone they could just intimidate or negotiate with. This would be a fight, one that could end badly if they weren't careful. "Where do we find him?" Jordan asked, his voice tense with uncertainty. Maya glanced around the club. "He's probably somewhere in here. He's not hard to spot. He's got that look of someone who thinks they're untouchable." They began to scan the room, taking in every face, every movement. Ethan kept his eyes sharp, watching for any sign of Roland. And then, like a shadow in the dim light, he spotted him. A tall man in an expensive suit, his posture stiff and arrogant, sitting at a corner booth with a glass of whiskey in hand. He had a cold, calculating look in his eyes, as though he was constantly assessing the value of everyone around him. "That's him," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's go." They moved through the crowd, trying to blend in, their every step measured. As they approached Roland's booth, Ethan could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. They were about to cross a line from which there was no turning back. Maya slid into the seat across from Roland without hesitation, her eyes locking onto his. "You're in the wrong place," she said, her tone icy. "And you're in over your head." Roland's lips curled into a smirk, clearly unimpressed by her boldness. "And what makes you think you're in a position to tell me that?" Ethan stepped closer, his hands clenched at his sides. They didn't have time for games anymore. "This is your warning," Maya said coldly. "Step aside, or we'll make you." Roland's smirk faltered for just a moment, but then he leaned back, as if considering his next move carefully. "So, you think you can threaten me?" he said, his voice low, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Roland's eyes narrowed, studying Maya and Ethan with an unsettling calmness. He wasn't fazed by their threat, nor was he intimidated by the position they'd taken. Instead, his gaze flicked over to Jordan, who had positioned himself a few feet away, standing as if ready to intervene at any moment. The tension in the air was palpable, sharp enough to slice through the noise of the club, the clink of glasses, and the faint hum of the music. Ethan could almost feel the weight of Roland's gaze, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Roland said, his voice smooth, yet dripping with condescension. "But do you know who you're talking to? Do you have any idea what you're up against?" Maya's lips twitched into a small smile, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was the kind of smile someone gave before the storm broke loose. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Roland's. "I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you're doing here. Ashford isn't going to let you play in his sandbox. You're just another pawn trying to make your move." Roland's smirk deepened, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, something Maya caught instantly. It was subtle, but it was there. Roland was more nervous than he was letting on. She knew she had to press him, push him to reveal more. "You think you can walk in here and steal Ashford's spot?" Maya continued, her voice low but fierce. "Ashford has eyes everywhere. You think he won't know about this little game you're playing?" Roland's posture shifted, his shoulders tense. For a brief second, his composure cracked. But then, he leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "So, you think I'm scared of Ashford? You think I don't know what I'm doing?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. "It's not about being scared. It's about being smart. Ashford is no fool, Roland. If you keep pushing him, you're going to get caught in the crossfire." Roland chuckled darkly, as if they were the naive ones. "You think I haven't thought of that? I know exactly what I'm getting into. I've been playing this game for a long time. There it was, the arrogance. Roland had no idea who he was up against. He was so certain of his position that he didn't see the trap closing in. Maya's mind was already moving a few steps ahead. Let's get one thing straight, Roland, Maya said coldly. You may have played in Ashford's world before, but things have changed. And I'm not here to negotiate with you. I'm here to take you down. For a moment, the words hung in the air like a dare. Roland's eyes flickered with something darker, something that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. But instead of drawing a weapon or making a threat, Roland did something unexpected. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. You think you can just walk in here and make demands, Maya? He asked, his tone suddenly colder. You've got no idea who you're dealing with. I've got connections. People who will end you before you even take a breath. Ethan's grip on the chair he was standing near tightened, his fists clenched. He wasn't worried about Roland's threats. He had heard worse. But there was something about Roland's words that rang true. This wasn't just some underling with a big ego. This was a man who had the connections, the influence, and the resources to cause real trouble. Maya didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid of him. You're out of your league, Roland, she said, her voice quiet but cutting. You're playing a dangerous game, and I'm here to end it. For a long, tense moment, neither side moved. The standoff seemed to stretch on forever. Ethan could feel the weight of the decision they were about to make. This wasn't just a negotiation. This was a declaration of war. Finally, Roland broke the silence. I don't know what game you think you're playing, Maya, but if you think you can just take me down, you've got another thing coming. The words sent a cold shiver down Ethan's spine, but it was the glint in Roland's eyes that worried him the most. Roland wasn't playing around. This was personal. Make no mistake, Roland continued, his voice lowering to a growl. I'm not the one you want to mess with. You think you can bring me down? Fine, but I guarantee you'll regret it. The intensity in his voice was unsettling. Ethan exchanged a quick look with Maya. They were past the point of no return. There was no turning back now. Maya didn't hesitate. If you want to make a move, Roland, I suggest you do it now. Roland's lips twitched, and for a moment, he seemed to weigh his options. But instead of reacting with violence or backing down, he did something entirely different. He smiled. I'm not going to fight you, Maya, he said, his voice suddenly calm, almost too calm. But mark my words, you'll regret this. I'm not the one who's going to end up with blood on my hands. You'll find that out soon enough. The air grew thick with tension, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the space between them. Maya and Ethan didn't flinch, but they knew this was far from over. Roland was playing his own game, and they had just stepped into it. With a slow, deliberate motion, Roland stood up from the booth, adjusting his suit as if nothing had happened. He gave them a final, knowing look before turning on his heel and walking away, his figure swallowed up by the crowd in the club. Maya didn't move. She stayed seated, her eyes never leaving the spot where Roland had been. Ethan and Jordan exchanged uneasy glances. That was intense, Jordan murmured, clearly on edge. Maya stood up slowly, her eyes still fixed on the crowd. We've got what we need. Roland thinks he's in control, but he's the one who's walking into a trap. Ethan took a deep breath. So what now? Maya's gaze finally shifted toward him, her expression hardening. Now we go after Ashford. Roland may have connections, but we've got something he doesn't, an advantage. She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps purposeful. Ethan and Jordan followed, their minds racing with the implications of the conversation. They had entered a dangerous game, and they had no choice but to play to win. The night was far from over, and Maya could feel the weight of the conversation with Roland pressing on her chest like a heavy stone. The club had quieted down somewhat after the confrontation, but the underlying tension remained. Ethan and Jordan followed closely behind her as they left the dark, pulsing atmosphere of the club and stepped into the cooler night air. Maya had never been one to back down from a challenge, but Roland's parting words gnawed at her. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. He wasn't bluffing, and that worried her more than she cared to admit. Are we sure we want to go after Ashford right now? Jordan's voice broke through her thoughts. She glanced back at him as they reached the car, his face tense under the streetlights. If Roland's got that much power, maybe we should regroup before making a move. Maya didn't hesitate. No, we move now. The longer we wait, the more he thinks he's won. We have to put pressure on Ashford and let him know we're not backing down. Ethan, who had been silent up until now, nodded in agreement. We're past the point of turning back. Roland's not the only one with connections, and if Ashford thinks we're scared, he's got another thing coming. Maya could feel their resolve building, but she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Ashford wasn't just some businessman they could intimidate. He was ruthless, calculating, and had been in control for far too long. If they were going to topple him, it would take more than just strategy. It would take precision. As they climbed into the car and the engine roared to life, Maya felt a surge of determination. She wasn't just doing this for herself or for Roland. She was doing it for everyone Ashford had trampled on in his rise to power. People like her mother, who had fought tooth and nail to survive in a world stacked against her. People who were still struggling while Ashford thrived. The ride to the heart of Ashford's empire was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional mutterings of the team as they went over the plan again. They were about to hit Ashford where it hurt the most. His finances, his pride, his empire. As they neared Ashford's towering corporate headquarters, Maya's heart began to race. She had been in high-stakes situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about making the right moves. This was about dismantling a machine built on corruption, greed, and exploitation. They parked a few blocks away, out of sight but close enough to make a quick escape. Maya had already gathered intel, and now it was time to make the next move. "Remember," Maya said, her voice firm as she looked at Ethan and Jordan, "we're not just here to scare Ashford. We're here to make him think twice about crossing us." Jordan gave a sharp nod, his eyes burning with purpose. "We'll hit them where it hurts. They won't know what hit them." Ethan turned to Maya, his expression serious. "Just make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. This could escalate quickly." Maya glanced back at the towering building in front of them, the lights from the windows casting long shadows. It was a fortress, an empire built on the backs of people who had no say in the matter. "I'm ready," Maya said, her voice resolute. "Let's make this count." The three of them approached the building, slipping into the shadows as they made their way around the back entrance. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the quiet night, but Maya's mind was focused on the task at hand. She had to be careful. Ashford's operation wasn't something you could take down with brute force alone. They needed to be smart, precise. Every move they made had to count, and she knew the stakes were high. If they failed, it wasn't just their lives that would be at risk. It would be the lives of countless others who had suffered because of Ashford's empire. The door to the back entrance was locked, but Maya had anticipated that. With a swift motion, she pulled out a small device from her jacket and slipped it into the lock. A few seconds later, the door clicked open. Inside, the building was eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of voices from the main offices. Maya held up a hand, signaling the others to stay low. They couldn't afford to get caught now. As they moved through the corridors, Maya's mind raced through the plan. She knew Ashford had powerful allies, but she also knew there was one thing they had that Ashford didn't, an element of surprise. If they could make it to Ashford's office and expose his corrupt dealings, it would send a message that no one in his circle could ignore. They reached the elevator banks, and Maya pressed the button for the top floor, the floor where Ashford's office was located. The elevator doors slid open silently, and the three of them stepped inside. "Last chance to back out," Ethan whispered, though there was no hesitation in his voice. Maya's eyes were steely as she turned to face him. "No turning back now. This ends tonight." The elevator ascended smoothly, and as it passed each floor, Maya's anticipation grew. They were so close. But as the doors slid open to the top floor, she felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. Someone was waiting for them. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and the silence that followed was thick with tension. Maya's breath hitched for a moment, but she masked her unease with a calm expression. The top floor was lavish, sleek, modern furniture, bright lights, and a panoramic view of the city's skyline that screamed wealth and power. But what caught her attention wasn't the opulence. It was the figure standing in front of Ashford's office, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a sharp black suit that screamed danger. He stood with his back to the elevator, eyes scanning the hallway. The moment he heard the elevator, he turned with a predatory grace. Maya's heart skipped a beat. It was Roland. What is he doing here? Jordan muttered, his voice low, but the panic in it was unmistakable. Maya didn't respond right away. Roland wasn't just a man of power. He was dangerous. A shadow in the game, a player who controlled information, resources, and people. He had eyes everywhere, and if he was here now, it meant one thing. They had been made. Roland's lips curled into a tight smile as he stepped forward. Well, he said, his voice smooth and almost amused. I had a feeling we'd be seeing each other again tonight. Maya kept her cool, even as the situation threatened to spiral out of control. She had been expecting a confrontation, but not with Roland. What are you doing here? She asked, her tone sharp but controlled. Roland raised an eyebrow. Isn't it obvious? I'm here to make sure things don't get out of hand. You're working with Ashford? Maya didn't hide the disbelief in her voice. Roland was too sharp to be involved with someone as sloppy as Ashford. Roland chuckled, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. Let's just say I have a mutual interest in his operations. I'm not exactly working with him, more like managing him. And you, Maya, he said, his gaze narrowing. You're making a dangerous move tonight. Maya's mind raced. Roland wasn't just here to stop her. He was playing his own game, and his interests were at odds with Ashford's. If Roland had influence over Ashford, this could be a massive opportunity. What do you want? Ethan asked, stepping forward cautiously. He was trying to assess Roland, but Maya could see the uncertainty in his stance. Roland's smile faded into something far colder. I want the same thing I've always wanted. Control. Ashford's empire is crumbling, and you're here to add fuel to the fire. The question is, how much of it are you willing to burn down to get what you want? Maya stood her ground. I'm not afraid of you, Roland. This isn't your game. You're just a puppet like Ashford, pulling strings from the shadows. But it's time to cut them. Roland's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Anger, perhaps, or frustration. But it was quickly replaced by a calculated calm. You're underestimating me, Maya. That's your first mistake. He gestured to the security camera mounted on the wall nearby, its red light blinking in the corner. And that's your second. Before she could react, Roland pressed a button on a small device in his pocket. Maya's heart sank as she heard the unmistakable sound of a lock clicking open. She looked over to the elevator. The doors were sliding open, revealing two more men, armed, dressed in tactical gear. Their eyes scanned the hallway, and Maya's gut told her this was no coincidence. Your timing couldn't be worse, Roland said, his voice dripping with amusement. You've walked straight into my trap. Maya's eyes flicked to Ethan and Jordan. They were ready, standing slightly behind her, fingers twitching near their own weapons. But Roland had outmaneuvered them. He'd anticipated their every move. How many times do I have to tell you? Roland continued, his tone casual, like he was enjoying this moment. You're a chess piece, Maya, and I'm the one controlling the board. Maya clenched her fists, but she refused to show weakness. Roland wasn't in control, not yet. She wasn't about to let him think he had the upper hand. I'm not the one in checkmate here, Roland, she said, her voice steady. You're the one walking into a trap. Roland's expression shifted, just a flicker, but enough for Maya to see that her words had cut deeper than she intended. For a moment, he faltered, and in that instant, Maya made her move. She didn't look at Ethan or Jordan. She just stepped forward, drawing her weapon from under her coat. The two guards flanking Roland tensed immediately, but she was faster. In a fluid motion, Maya aimed her gun at the nearest guard, her finger on the trigger. The tension in the air thickened, and Roland's smirk vanished. I'd reconsider your next move, Maya said coolly, never breaking eye contact with him. Roland held up his hands in mock surrender, though his eyes remained cold. Well played, he said, his voice softer now. But you're not getting out of here unscathed. Maya's mind was racing. They were in a standoff, and things could go south in an instant. But she wasn't backing down. Why don't you let me worry about that? She replied, her grip tightening on the gun. I've come too far to let you ruin it now. Just then, the distant sound of a door opening echoed down the hallway, and Roland's eyes flickered to the source of the noise. His expression darkened. Now, this is interesting, he murmured under his breath. The game had just taken a new turn. The sound of the door opening echoed in the hallway, reverberating off the sleek walls of the top-floor corridor. Maya's heart rate quickened. Every instinct told her something was shifting, but she couldn't tell whether it was a threat or an opportunity. Roland's eyes flickered toward the door, his expression tightening with an unreadable mix of wariness and anticipation. The two armed men flanking him shifted uneasily, their attention drawn to the same sound. Maya held her ground, the gun still trained on the nearest guard. "What's going on, Roland?" she asked, her voice as cold as the air between them. "You expecting company?" Roland didn't answer immediately. His lips twitched in a grim smile. "I wouldn't call it company," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the door. "But let's just say, this meeting might get a lot more complicated." Maya's mind raced. Roland wasn't easily rattled, so the appearance of whoever was behind that door must have been significant. The seconds stretched out, heavy with tension, and then the door swung fully open. A figure stepped into the hallway, tall, with a military posture that immediately caught Maya's attention. A woman. She wore a dark, tactical suit, and her eyes scanned the room with the sharp precision of someone who had seen too much of the world's darker corners. She had an air of authority that rivaled Roland's, and the subtle yet undeniable sense of power emanating from her made Maya's instincts flare. But it wasn't just her commanding presence that drew Maya's focus. It was the recognition that flashed through her mind. The woman was no stranger. Maya had seen her before, on the streets, in the shadows, moving like a ghost among the city's underworld. The woman's gaze locked onto Maya, and she gave a small, knowing smile. "I wasn't expecting to find you here, Maya," she said, her voice smooth, like the sound of gravel scraping against concrete. "But then again, I suppose none of us were expecting this, were we?" Roland's expression shifted instantly. For the first time since their encounter, he looked genuinely surprised. Off balance, even. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. Maya's mind raced. The woman had appeared out of nowhere, but there was something about her presence that suggested she had an understanding of this game, possibly even a deeper connection to it than Roland himself. Her words were calculated, as if she already knew everything about Maya and about Roland. "I think we're past the point of pretending we don't know each other," the woman continued, her gaze moving briefly to Roland before returning to Maya. "But I can see this is a moment of tension." Maya lowered her gun just a fraction, but she didn't relax her stance. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice firm. The woman chuckled softly, as though amused by Maya's question. "I'm someone who's tired of the games, Maya," she said, stepping forward with a controlled confidence. "I'm the one who's going to take control of this situation. And I think it's time we cut through the bullshit, don't you think?" Roland's eyes flickered between the two women, his jaw tightening. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone colder now, guarded. The woman's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been watching you, Roland. And I've been watching her, too," she nodded toward Maya. "You two have been playing your little game for far too long, and I think it's time someone else called the shots." Roland's nostrils flared, his composure slipping. "You think you can just come in here and take control?" he sneered, his voice hardening. "I'm the one who's been pulling the strings around here. You have no idea what you're dealing with." The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she took another step forward, her eyes never leaving Roland's. "I'm the one who's been pulling strings longer than you, Roland. You just don't know it yet." Maya exchanged a glance with Jordan and Ethan, who were still standing behind her. Both of them seemed equally confused and cautious. The entire situation had taken a turn that none of them had anticipated, and it was clear that whoever this woman was, she held the power to shift everything in an instant. "You've been watching me?" Maya asked, her voice skeptical. "For how long?" The woman's smile widened, and she nodded slowly. "Long enough to know that you've got potential, Maya, but you've also got a lot of enemies. Roland, Ashford, and a whole lot of others who want you dead. You're in over your head, And unless you learn to play this game with someone who actually knows the rules, you'll end up just another casualty. Maya's gaze narrowed. And what do you want from me? She asked, suspicion lacing her words. You think you can just waltz in here and offer me some kind of deal? I'm offering you a chance to survive, the woman said bluntly. I'm offering you an alliance, one that will make Roland's little empire look like a child's sandbox. The difference is, you won't be alone. You'll have the power you need to take down Ashford and anyone else who stands in your way. The offer hung in the air like a weight, and Maya felt the gravity of it. She could sense the danger in this woman's words, but also something else, the truth. The game was shifting, and if she didn't make the right decision, she would find herself in an even worse position than before. Roland's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't speak, clearly too taken aback by the woman's sudden entrance to formulate a response. Maya weighed her options quickly, her mind sharp and calculating. This woman, whoever she was offering something she couldn't afford to ignore. But she wasn't about to trust her blindly. I don't trust you, Maya said firmly, her gaze unwavering. The woman's smile didn't falter. You don't have to trust me, but you can't ignore the fact that you're outmatched. And I'm offering you a way out of this alive. Maya's hand tightened around her weapon, but she didn't make a move. This was a pivotal moment. One wrong decision could change everything. The silence in the hallway was thick, almost suffocating. Maya's heart raced, her mind caught between caution and curiosity. The woman, whoever she was, had just thrown down a gauntlet, and the weight of her words pressed heavily on Maya's chest. Roland stood motionless, his usual swagger replaced by a rare uncertainty. The tension between them was palpable, but Maya's focus was fixed on the offer hanging in the air. You think you can take down Ashford? Maya asked, her voice cutting through the silence. What makes you think I need your help with that? The woman's gaze softened, but only slightly. Because, Maya, Ashford isn't just any enemy. He's the kind of man who plays a game with no rules. He manipulates everything around him, turning people into pawns, just like he did with your brother. The mention of her brother was like a punch to the gut. Maya's breath caught, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the overwhelming weight of everything she had been fighting for. The life she'd left behind, the memories of her brother's face, the way he'd been taken from her so cruelly. She clenched her fists, but didn't lower her weapon. Don't mention him, Maya growled, her voice low and dangerous. The woman didn't flinch. I'm not here to hurt you, Maya. I'm here to offer you a way to get him back. But you have to trust me enough to work together. Roland's lip curled in disdain. And what makes you think she'll ever trust you? You're just a stranger with a slick pitch. The woman didn't look at Roland. Her attention remained solely on Maya. It's not a pitch, Roland. It's a warning. And if you keep standing in the way, you'll find yourself on the losing side of this. Maya's mind raced. Every instinct told her to be cautious, but part of her recognized the truth in the woman's words. Ashford was a ruthless force, and she had underestimated just how far he was willing to go. The people who worked for him, the ones she crossed paths with, weren't just men with power. They were pawns, playing a much larger game. What's your name? Maya asked, her voice cool and measured, trying to reclaim control of the situation. The woman smiled faintly. Call me Cassandra. And yes, I've been keeping an eye on you, Maya. I know what you're capable of. You're good at playing the game, but you're not yet playing it at the level that's required to take down someone like Ashford. Maya's eyes narrowed. Why are you telling me all this? What's in it for you? Cassandra tilted her head, considering the question. What's in it for me? That's simple. I'm tired of watching men like Ashford win. I'm tired of watching people like you, Maya, fight battles they don't even know they're losing. I'm offering you a chance to even the score. And I'm doing it because I believe you can handle it. The sincerity in Cassandra's words struck Maya harder than she expected. It wasn't an empty sales pitch. It was a declaration of war, and it carried weight. Maya wasn't sure what to make of the woman, but one thing was clear. Cassandra wasn't someone who made threats lightly. She was in this for something bigger, something personal. Maya looked over at Roland, her eyes sharp. You were right, Roland. You don't know who you're dealing with. She didn't take her gaze off Cassandra as she spoke. I'll take your deal, but I'll be running the show. You can't tell me what to do. Cassandra's smile was measured, almost approving. Fair enough. But you'll need my resources if you're going to make any headway. And you'll need allies who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. The room seemed to hold its breath as Maya processed the offer. The pieces of her life, of this chaotic puzzle, were coming together. Slowly, but they were forming a clearer picture. The game wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control of the narrative. Ashford had taken too much from her, and now it was time to start reclaiming it. I'm in, Maya said, her voice cold and decisive. But I don't trust you, Cassandra. I'll be watching every move you make. I expect nothing less, Cassandra replied, her tone unwavering. But remember this, Maya, trust is a luxury you can't afford in this game. And the faster you realize that, the faster you'll see how much power you can really hold. Roland stepped forward, his anger barely contained. You're making a huge mistake, Maya, he spat. But Maya cut him off with a glare that could have frozen fire. No, Roland, she said, her voice low and dangerous. The mistake was thinking you could control me. With that, Maya turned to face Cassandra fully, her decision made. Where do we start? Cassandra's eyes gleamed with approval. We start by cutting off the head of the snake. And you're going to need every weapon you can find, every ally, and every ounce of your determination to make it happen. Maya nodded, her resolve hardening. Then let's get to work. The silence between them was thick with the weight of the alliance they had just forged. Maya knew this was only the beginning. There was no turning back now. Ashford, Roland, and all the others who had underestimated her were in for a rude awakening. Maya had made her choice. She had chosen a side. And it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about winning. The city was still alive with energy as night fell, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that it was all an illusion. The neon lights, the endless noise, the hustle of people moving through their lives. It all felt fake, like a mask hiding something darker beneath. Ashford had built his empire on deceit and manipulation, and as much as she hated to admit it, Maya knew she was playing a game that was far beyond her. But she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Cassandra's words rang in her ears. You'll need allies who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. But finding those allies wasn't as easy as it sounded. In a city this corrupt, everyone had a price, and trust was a luxury few could afford. Maya had learned that the hard way. Where are we headed? Roland's voice broke through her thoughts, and Maya turned to find him sitting in the passenger seat of her car, his arms crossed, a scowl on his face. He hadn't been happy about the deal she'd struck with Cassandra, but Maya was used to that. Roland always thought he knew what was best for her, but she was done being his puppet. Shut up and let me drive, Maya snapped, her eyes on the road. The tension between them was thick, but she didn't have time for his complaints. Ashford was still out there, and she needed to be prepared for what was coming next. Roland grumbled but didn't argue. Maya could feel his eyes on her, but she refused to acknowledge it. She couldn't afford to be distracted right now, not when she was heading into the lion's den. The plan was simple, if simple was ever the right word for something like this. Cassandra had promised her information about Ashford's inner circle, about the people who helped him control the city. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. They pulled up to a nondescript building on the edge of town, one that Maya knew had been tied to Ashford's operations for years. It was a warehouse of sorts, used for storing everything from weapons to counterfeit goods. Maya had always wondered what else went on inside, and tonight, she was going to find out. Ready for this? Roland asked, his voice quieter now. Maya didn't answer at first, instead taking a deep breath. She had no illusions about how dangerous this was. Every step she took felt like walking on a tightrope, and she was one misstep away from falling into a trap. But she wasn't going to let fear control her. Not anymore. I'm ready, she said, finally meeting his gaze. Stay close and don't make a sound. Roland nodded, his hand brushing the gun at his side. Maya didn't need to look to know that he was ready for a fight. He always was. But Maya wasn't just going to shoot her way out of this. She had a bigger plan in mind. They made their way to the entrance of the warehouse, sticking to the shadows as best as they could. The place was eerily quiet, and Maya's senses were on high alert. She could hear the faint hum of machinery in the distance, the occasional shuffle of footsteps echoing in the halls. Whoever was inside knew how to keep things quiet, too quiet. Maya motioned for Roland to follow her, her steps swift and deliberate. They moved through the darkened halls, avoiding the guards patrolling the area. They were close now, so close she could almost taste the information she was here to find. And then, suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. "What are you doing here?" Maya froze, her heart racing. She knew that voice. A man stepped out from the shadows, his face partially obscured by a hood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the unmistakable air of someone who knew exactly what was going on. "Who are you?" Maya demanded, her hand instinctively going to the gun at her side. "How do you know me?" The man smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. "I know you because I've been watching you, Maya. I know everything about you. And now, you've made the mistake of coming here." Maya didn't flinch. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for Ashford." The man's smile widened, and he stepped forward. "That's the thing, Maya. You're not going to get to Ashford. Not like this. Not without consequences." Roland took a step forward, his hand resting on the handle of his gun. "What's the game here, man?" he growled. "You think we're just going to walk away from this?" The man's eyes flicked to Roland, but he didn't seem intimidated. "You're in way over your heads. Both of you." Maya's mind raced, analyzing the situation. The man wasn't just some low-level thug. He knew who she was, and more importantly, he knew why she was here. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a trap. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps reached her ears, and she knew they were running out of time. "We need to go," Maya said, her voice low and steady. "Now." But Roland didn't move. Instead, he stood there, glaring at the man with a defiance that Maya didn't have time to fully process. "I'm not backing down, Maya. We came here for answers. I'm not leaving without them." Maya hesitated. The stakes had just gotten higher, and she knew that staying and fighting might be a death sentence. But Roland was stubborn, and she knew he wouldn't leave without a fight. "Stay close," Maya muttered, already making her way toward the nearest exit. "And if you get us killed, I swear I'll never forgive you." The man didn't follow them, but his laughter echoed in the halls behind them, sending a chill down Maya's spine. Whoever he was, whatever game he was playing, it wasn't over yet. They had walked straight into the middle of something much bigger than they had anticipated, and now they were in deeper than ever before. As Maya and Roland made their way to the exit, the weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. Cassandra had warned her that the game was bigger than she thought, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was facing now. Ashford wasn't just a man. He was a system, a machine, and they were caught in its gears. Maya wasn't sure how they were going to get out of this, but one thing was certain. They couldn't trust anyone. Not anymore. Maya's pulse pounded in her ears as she and Roland hurried through the dimly lit streets, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the empty buildings. The warehouse was now behind them, but the sense of danger hadn't faded. It loomed over them like a storm cloud, waiting to strike. Roland was quiet, his face tense. Maya could tell he was itching for a fight, but the situation was far from simple. They needed information, and charging in blindly wasn't going to get them what they needed. "I don't like this," Roland muttered, his eyes scanning the street around them. "That guy back there. He knew too much. Too much about us." Maya nodded, her mind racing. The man in the warehouse, with his cold smile and ominous words, had rattled her more than she cared to admit. Whoever he was, he had ties to Ashford, and that made him dangerous. But Maya couldn't afford to let fear take over. She had a goal, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Ashford's goons, stop her now. "You're right," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "That guy's not just some thug. We've got bigger problems." Roland grunted, his eyes narrowing as they walked. "You think Ashford's already onto us? Is that why he set the trap?" "I don't know," Maya admitted, "but I don't think we can trust anyone at this point. Not even Cassandra." Roland stopped in his tracks, staring at Maya in disbelief. "You're saying we can't trust her now?" "I'm saying we need to be careful," Maya said, her tone sharp. "We've already crossed too many lines. If Ashford gets wind of what we're trying to do, it's over." They continued walking in silence, the weight of her words hanging heavy between them. Maya's mind was a whirlwind. the pieces of the puzzle falling into place but never quite fitting. She needed to think clearly, but every time she took a step forward, it felt like the ground was shifting beneath her. A few blocks later, they reached Maya's apartment, a small but cozy unit on the third floor of an old building. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly as she unlocked the door. Once inside, she immediately locked it behind them, a sense of security washing over her, though she knew it wouldn't last long. Roland slumped onto the couch, running a hand through his hair in frustration. So what now? What's the plan? Maya took a deep breath, walking to the small desk in the corner of the room. She pulled out a stack of papers, documents she had gathered over the past few weeks, everything she had on Ashford, his operations, and the people who worked for him. She spread them out on the desk, her fingers tracing the names and addresses as she tried to connect the dots. "We go after his inner circle," Maya said, her voice low but determined. "Ashford isn't the only one pulling the strings. If we can get to the people he trusts, we can take him down from the inside." Roland looked at the papers on the desk, his eyes flicking from one name to the next. "That's a dangerous move, Maya. These people are ruthless." "I know," she replied, "but it's the only shot we've got." She turned her attention to the file that had been troubling her the most, the one marked with a red X. It contained information on Ashford's closest allies, the ones who were untouchable, who were as corrupt as he was. Maya had already crossed paths with some of them, and each one was a potential threat. Her finger landed on a name: Evan Winters, the man who was rumored to be Ashford's right-hand man. He was a ghost. No one ever seemed to know much about him, but Maya had learned enough to know he was the key. If she could get to him, she could unravel everything. "That's the one," Maya muttered to herself. Roland stood up, his eyes narrowed. "You think he'll give us the information we need?" "If we play it right, yes," Maya said, flipping through the pages until she found the address she was looking for. "But getting to him won't be easy." "What's the plan?" Roland asked, leaning over her shoulder to look at the address. "We'll make contact. We don't need to fight. We just need to talk," Maya said, her voice steady. "I'll do the talking. You stay back and keep watch." Roland frowned. "You're sure about this?" Maya met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I don't trust anyone in this city, Roland, but I trust you to have my back." He didn't say anything, but his stiff posture softened, and he nodded. It was a risk, and it could all go terribly wrong, but Maya had no other choice. She had to trust that the pieces would fall into place, that she could outsmart Ashford's people and stay one step ahead. The next few hours passed in a blur as Maya prepared for the meeting. She changed into a sleek black dress, one that was sophisticated but not too flashy. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, but she needed to look confident, capable. Roland went over the plans again, making sure they were both on the same page. Every detail had to be perfect. When the time came, they left the apartment and made their way to the location. Maya's nerves were on edge, but she kept her composure, focusing on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to let anything distract her. Not the city, not the people, and certainly not Ashford. As they approached the building, a sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she couldn't back out now. Not when she was this close. The trap was closing in, and Maya was about to walk right into it. The dark alleyway stretched before them, lit only by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she and Roland approached the building where they were supposed to meet Evan Winters. Her mind was racing, calculating every possible outcome, but no matter how she tried to prepare herself, nothing could settle the anxiety twisting in her gut. "This is it," Roland said quietly, his voice steady but his eyes sharp with caution. "Keep your guard up." Maya nodded, her hand resting on the small weapon concealed beneath her jacket. She knew she wasn't expecting a fight, but the streets were unpredictable, and she wasn't taking any chances. They had been surveilling this area for days, and now, it was time to face whatever waited for them. The building ahead of them was a nondescript warehouse, its windows dark and its doors locked. There was nothing special about it, but Maya knew better. This was where Winters operated from, a place so inconspicuous that no one would ever suspect it was the center of one of Ashford's most secretive operations. Maya's mind flashed back to her encounter with Ashford's people in the warehouse a few nights ago. She had narrowly escaped that confrontation, but tonight felt different. The stakes were higher, and the tension in the air was thick. They stopped in front of the entrance, and Maya glanced over at Roland. His jaw was clenched, but there was a glint of something in his eyes, determination, maybe even a little fear, but he wasn't backing down. Neither of them was. The door opened with a creak, and a tall figure stepped out from the shadows. His face was obscured by a hood, but Maya could tell it was him. Evan Winters. His reputation preceded him, and his presence here confirmed everything she had suspected. This was no coincidence. "You must be Maya," the man said in a low voice, his tone cool and detached. "And you brought company." Maya stepped forward, keeping her posture confident despite the growing unease in her chest. "I didn't come here to waste your time, Winters. I came for information." Winters chuckled darkly, stepping into the light. His face was rugged, with sharp features and eyes that held an unsettling calmness. There was no warmth in his gaze, only calculation. "Information, huh?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And what makes you think I have anything worth sharing?" Maya didn't flinch. She had dealt with people like him before. People who thought they were untouchable, who believed their power gave them immunity from the rules of the world. She knew how to break that arrogance. She just needed the right leverage. "I know who you work for," Maya said, her voice steady. "And I know you're looking to expand. You're not as hidden as you think." Winters raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her boldness. "And what do you want from me?" "Help me take Ashford down, and I'll make sure you get your cut. You won't have to hide in the shadows anymore. You can step into the light." There was a moment of silence between them, and Maya could see the wheels turning in Winters' mind. He was weighing his options, deciding whether she was a threat or a potential ally. "Do you honestly think you can take down Ashford?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "He's too powerful. Even you can't fight that." Maya didn't hesitate. "I'm not fighting him alone, but I can take down the people who work for him, the ones who think they're untouchable. Like you." Winters took a step closer, his face hardening. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you when Ashford decides to make you disappear." "I'm not afraid of Ashford," Maya said, her voice cold. "And neither should you be. You're just as expendable as the rest of them." For a moment, Winters seemed to consider her words, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right, you've got my attention. But don't think for a second that this is a favor. I'm not helping you out of the goodness of my heart. I want something in return." Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment, the deal. She had to tread carefully. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice controlled but wary. "Ashford's empire is crumbling," Winters said, his eyes narrowing as he spoke. "And I want a piece of it before it all falls apart. I want leverage, something Ashford can't afford to lose." Maya was already thinking 2 steps ahead. What kind of leverage? He smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile. "I'll let you know when the time comes. But first, you need to prove you're worth the risk." Maya's instinct screamed at her. This wasn't just about Ashford anymore. It was about power. And Winters was trying to play both sides. "I'll do whatever it takes to take Ashford down," Maya said firmly, her eyes locked on his. "But if you're playing me, Winters, you won't get another chance." Winters' smile didn't falter. "We'll see about that." He motioned for them to follow him inside the building. Roland shot Maya a glance, and she gave him a subtle nod. There was no turning back now. They were in this together. As they stepped into the dark, quiet interior of the warehouse, Maya's thoughts raced. She had no idea what kind of game Winters was playing, but she knew one thing. She had to outsmart him before he outsmarted her. The warehouse was colder than it had seemed from the outside, the air thick with the scent of rust and mildew. Maya's footsteps echoed through the cavernous space, each sound amplifying the tension that had settled in her chest. Roland walked silently behind her, his gaze flicking between the shadows, ever watchful. Evan Winters led them through the maze of stacked crates and abandoned equipment. His movements were fluid, calculated. He had the kind of confidence that came from years of navigating dangerous waters. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap, but she pushed the thought aside. This wasn't the time for hesitation. "Where's the information you promised?" Maya asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Winters stopped in front of a large steel door and turned to face her. The smile on his face was sharp, predatory. "Patience, Maya. You're about to see just how deep this runs." He gestured for them to enter, and Maya stepped through the door, her senses immediately on high alert. The room was dimly lit, with a single desk in the center and several monitors scattered around the perimeter, all displaying surveillance footage. She scanned the room, her mind racing with possibilities. "This is where you've been hiding all this time?" Roland muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Thought it'd be more secure." Winter's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "It's not about security. It's about control. And in this world, control is everything." Maya's gaze landed on the desk, where a file lay open. It was covered in documents, maps, financial records, and a list of names, all connected to Ashford's operations. She moved toward it, her heart pounding in anticipation. "This is it, isn't it?" Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The evidence we need." But just as her fingers hovered over the file, a voice behind her froze her in her tracks. "You're not taking anything from here, Maya." Maya whipped around, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon beneath her jacket. Roland's eyes snapped to the figure emerging from the shadows, his expression darkening. Standing in the doorway was a tall man, his features sharp and angular, wearing a leather jacket that bore the unmistakable logo of Ashford's inner circle. Maya's pulse spiked. This wasn't part of the plan. "Who the hell are you?" Roland demanded, his stance tense. The man smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "Name's Mason. I've been keeping an eye on you, Maya. And I must say, I'm impressed you've made it this far." Maya's gut twisted. The air around them thickened with the sense of betrayal. "You're with Ashford," she said flatly. Mason chuckled darkly, taking a slow step forward. "Not quite. I'm with Winters. But that doesn't mean I'm on your side, sweetheart." Maya's blood ran cold. "What is this, then? A double cross?" "I wouldn't call it that," Winters said, his voice still calm, almost amused. "More like a partnership. You see, I've been in this game long enough to know that everyone has a price. You, Maya, are no exception." Her stomach churned as realization dawned. She had been played. Winters had never intended to help her. He had been setting her up from the start, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, Mason was here, confirming her worst fear. She had walked right into a trap. "You've been using me," Maya said, her voice low and dangerous. "You lied to me." Winters didn't flinch. "I never said I was your friend. I said I could help you get what you wanted. And I did, didn't I? You've got the information you need. Now, we move forward." Maya's mind raced, searching for a way out. She couldn't afford to panic now. "You think Ashford will let you walk away with that kind of power?" she demanded, her eyes flashing. "You think you're safe?" Mason laughed, a harsh sound that grated against her nerves. "Ashford doesn't care about Winters. He's just a pawn in the game. And right now, so are you." The realization hit like a punch to the gut. She had been nothing but a pawn in their scheme, nothing more than a tool to use and discard once she had outlived her usefulness. Maya's hand tightened around the grip of the gun at her side, her thoughts racing. She wasn't done yet. There had to be a way to turn this around, to take back control of the situation. She wasn't going to let them win. But before she could make a move, Roland stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "We're not your pawns, Winters, and we're not leaving without that file." The tension in the room ratcheted up as both Mason and Winters eyed Roland, their expressions hardening. Maya could see the wheels turning in Winters' mind. He was calculating his next move, and she could feel the danger closing in. "Then you leave me no choice," Winters said, his smile fading into something far colder. "If you want the file, you'll have to take it from me." With a swift motion, Winters pulled a gun from under his jacket and aimed it directly at Roland. The sudden movement sent a jolt of panic through Maya, but she didn't hesitate. Her own hand moved toward her weapon, but just as she was about to draw it, Mason lunged forward, grabbing her wrist with a vice-like grip. She struggled against his hold, trying to break free, but his strength was too much. Her gun clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the room like a death knell. "Game over, Maya," Mason said, his grip tightening. Winters stepped forward, lowering his gun as he took in the scene. "You should have known better than to trust anyone in this business. You've always been a means to an end." Maya's heart raced, her mind spinning. She had been so close to the truth, but now it seemed like all was lost. But she wouldn't give up without a fight. Not this time. Not when she was so close. The cold metal of the warehouse walls pressed in on Maya, and every second that passed felt like an eternity. Her mind raced, her pulse quickened, but despite the growing sense of impending doom, she refused to give in. There had to be a way out. She couldn't let Winters, Mason, or Ashford win. Not after everything. Mason's grip on her wrist tightened, and her free hand instinctively reached for her leg, where her backup knife was hidden. She was trapped, but she wasn't helpless. Roland, on the other hand, stood motionless, staring down Winters with a mixture of defiance and calm, the tension in the room almost unbearable. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched, at least not yet. "You think you've got us cornered, don't you?" Maya said, her voice steady despite the situation. "But I'm not leaving here without that file." Winters didn't respond immediately. He was still studying her, as if weighing the options, trying to decide whether it was worth it to kill her now or let her go for the sake of his own safety. His eyes flicked over to Mason, who was still holding Maya's wrist with an iron grip. "I think," Winters said, his tone calculating, "you've misunderstood the situation. You're the one in trouble, Maya, and you've run out of options." Maya's eyes narrowed as she assessed the room. There were only a few exits, but with Mason blocking one and Winters too close to Roland, it felt like a maze closing in on her. She needed a distraction, something to shift the balance in their favor. And then she saw it, a small object on the desk, a canister of pressurized air, likely used for cleaning the monitors. It was risky, but it was her only shot. With a subtle movement, Maya shifted her body, angling her arm just enough to reach the canister. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal, and with a swift motion, she grabbed it. In the same instant, she slammed her elbow into Mason's ribs, using the brief moment of shock to break free from his grip. The world slowed for a split second. Maya spun, bringing the canister around and aiming it at Winters' gun. The force of the air blast sent the weapon skittering across the floor. Roland, sensing the shift, rushed forward, grabbing the gun before Winters could react. Everything happened in a flash. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, the adrenaline surging through her veins. With one hand still gripping the canister, she whirled around to face Mason, who was recovering from the blow. In a split-second decision, she tossed the canister at him. It exploded in a burst of air, knocking him back and disorienting him for just enough time for Maya to land a solid punch to his jaw. Mason staggered backward, and for the first time, Maya saw the fear flicker in his eyes. Winters, now disarmed, took a step back, his posture defensive. "You think you can stop this? You've already lost, Maya." But Maya wasn't listening. She was focused on the file on the desk. She grabbed it, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. Every document, every name, every connection she needed to bring down Ashford's empire was here. But even as she felt a momentary surge of triumph, she knew it wasn't over yet. Roland stood beside her now, his voice low but fierce. "We've got what we came for, Maya. Let's go." "Not so fast," Winters sneered, his eyes dark with rage. "You really think you can just walk out of here with that file and expect to get away? Ashford's not going to let this go." Maya's grip on the file tightened, but she didn't respond. The game had changed. Now it wasn't just about escaping. It was about taking down the whole network. She couldn't let Winters or Mason intimidate her anymore. "Here's what's going to happen," Maya said, her voice icy. "You're going to let us walk out of here, and in exchange, I'll make sure Ashford never sees the light of day again." Winters didn't speak right away, but Maya could see the gears turning in his head. She knew he was weighing his options. The clock was ticking. A tense silence filled the room. Then, Winters nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're right. For now, you can leave. But this isn't over, Maya. You can't run forever." Maya didn't waste another second. With Roland at her side, she turned and headed for the door, the weight of the file heavy in her hands. She could feel the eyes of Mason and Winters burning into her back, but she kept her head high, her focus on the goal. They moved quickly through the warehouse, out the door, and into the night. The air was sharp and cold, but it never felt sweeter. They had what they came for. And with the evidence in her hands, Maya knew that the next step was to dismantle Ashford's empire, piece by piece. But even as they walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Ashford was too powerful, too connected to fall so easily. But Maya wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. The battle was far from over. It was just entering its final stage.